Yes.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, all of us together. Okay, so we're going to get started. So I want to be respectful of people's time. It's almost 10:20, a little after 10:20. So if we can come inside, and Auntie's going to start us with the pule.
As soon as the read is through registering, I pull it.
Okay.
Okay. I will do my best to say a prayer, and it will be very brief. And this prayer is to open up another discussion for us to learn more and probably better and more modern ways to be effective in the way we speak. So, okay, well, here this morning, all of us interested in how we can advocate for public policy and win the way we want to win. Because to win is really the objective of how we advocate. So bless Michelle and the organization she represents. And of course, OHA, that the leadership leads us to be the kind of leaders we want. So that basically we end up with a win-win situation for all concerned. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Auntie. Thank you. Awesome.
Some housekeeping. If you guys aren't familiar with the cafeteria, the one outside, it's open. We have lunch throughout the day, so I don't know if you guys want to start now or as you get hungry, go and get it and sit down. Something along that way. This actually came about from last fiscal year. We did a stadium workshop as well. This is how it really becomes a law and Hawaiian influence. So we wanted to make it a little bit more detailed and a lot more focused on Native Hawaiian challenges and issue with legislation. So thank you for coming. If you guys want to just maybe come closer, I think it's simple. We can do that.
The cold air. I'm fine either way.
Okay. But thank you, Michelle, for coming. Thank you, Sandra.
Good morning. I know most of you in the room. I just want to introduce Cassandra O'Hello. So she's one of the newer staff people at the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. And she really does outreach in our community to help to do community development and capacity building programs that we offer at CNHA. As was shared by Kamuela, we were asked as a council to spend a couple hours out here with you today. I know that we hosted some discussion last year about laws and how we introduce bills and how those bills become laws. And then, so today is really, we're going to take a look at 3 laws, familiar to some, but maybe not always read. Some of you read it all the time and some not so much. So we're going to look at 3 specific laws: the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, the Hawaiian Homelands Recovery Act, and just sections of the Admissions Act that are pertinent to us as Native Hawaiians. So we're going to start there because I think it's very important for us to understand and to review our rights as beneficiaries of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. So first taking a look at what those laws say so we can decide, are they being implemented efficiently? And if not, how do we do a better job at making sure they are more effectively implemented? So the second portion of our conversation is going to just be around general public policy. I was asked to share some of the work that we do at the council. Most of our public policy work is at the federal level because the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act is a federal law. Not everyone agrees with that, but we do. At the council, we choose to engage at all levels of government, whether that's the county, the state, or the federal government. Not everyone believes that they are true and that they exist, but we do. We work within that framework. So that will be section 2. And then the last section of today, one of the ways that we're implementing public policy advocacy is really pushing an initiative that we call Vote to Rise. That there are a good segment of our community that is not voting in order to get the change that we want. We're encouraging people to be engaged, to register, to have an active voice in our government. It's the beautiful thing of our democracy. Again, it's something that's out there. We're not telling you who to vote for, what party to be in, but just simply to be engaged. So I will share what that work is, and if folks would like to engage or not, that's completely up to you. So I'm going to start. Again, my name is Michelle Kauhane. I'm the President and CEO at the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. So I'm going to walk you through. Yes. And I did serve under the Abercrombie administration for a short time anyway, for just under 2 years as the Deputy Director at the State Department of Hawaiian Affairs. That is correct. Mahalo. Okay, somebody has to be my techie. Kamu or Cassandra, help me. It's not changing slides. So in this red book that you have in front of you, there's a copy of the slides and some of the information that we're going to go over today. And while Cassandra's trying to figure out how to make those slides work, I'm going to start on page 1 about CNHA. So CNHA is a Native Hawaiian nonprofit that was founded in 2001. We have a voting membership of over 100 Native Hawaiian nonprofits serving various sectors of our community. Those nonprofits range from being healthcare advocates, homesteads, housing, education, it runs the gamut. I report to a 21-member board of directors. Each of them are leaders of their organizations, again representing various sectors of the community. And then we have a very small staff right now. There are 7.5 of us who are doing this work. Our main office is in Kapolei on Oahu, and we have a small satellite office in Washington, D.C. Because as I said earlier, we do lots of federal policy advocacy, so we have a small satellite office in D.C. And our mission at the council is to enhance the cultural, economic, political, and community development of Native Hawaiians. That is a very broad mission. And so to achieve that, we do it in 4 program areas. Number 1, we operate a very active Native Hawaiian Policy Center, where we engage our members, our partners, and the broader community around public policy participation. Our lending investment services, which is number 2, we are a Native CDFI, a Community Development Financial Institution, which is just a fancy way that the federal government labels the fact that we are a community loan fund, and our objective is really to bring access to capital to underserved communities. We do lots of financing for construction on Hawaiian homelands because it's a difficult product to find when you want to be an owner-builder. It's something that banks don't want to do, but we want families to be able to get on their land. Hawaiian Way Fund, and where this program falls under, we do capacity support in our community. So we do community development and capacity building. We help folks do organizational board structure. We help folks to learn how to win grants. We were just on Maui yesterday doing a grant training for our members there. And then finally, we do an annual Native Hawaiian convention. The purpose of the convention is really to bring all sectors of our community together, whether that's health, education, housing, so that we talk to one another and we share the work that we're doing in various sectors of community. So CNHA's structure looks like this. Various nonprofits from different sectors elect our board, and then we deliver under those program areas. Policy advocacy, unifying leaders around those policy priorities, and then bringing resources and capacity to our members and to the community through our annual Native Hawaiian Convention. So the briefing topic today that we're going to start with is on 3 federal laws that the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act beneficiaries should know. Many of you do, and maybe some of you don't, but we are going to take a quick look at the 3 laws: Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, the Admissions Act, and the Hawaiian Homelands Recovery Act, because that information is pertinent to our lives on homesteads. We know that there are 7 homesteads here in East Hawaii. I think there's the most in this actual area statewide, and so that was why we were asked to do this. The presentation actually was developed by the SHA. They're a CNHA member dedicated to implementation of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. I think Mukuran and their homestead is a member of the SHA, and also Waimea, Mike Hudson's group, is a member of the SHA here on Hawaii Island. And I think those are the only 2 of the 7 on this island that are actually members of the SHA. And Maku'u. Maku'u is too, I'm sorry. So, and the SHA, who are they? They're a homestead nonprofit that was founded in 1987. They're a very active member of the CNHA Policy Center. There are about 30 homestead associations that are members, not all. There are more than 30 homestead associations across the state, but at least 30 of them are members of the SHA. There are 5 Mokupuni associations. They have a 5-board executive board, and their mission is to protect and perpetuate the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act and to serve Native Hawaiian beneficiaries both on the wait list and on the land. So they do lots of policy advocacy, again, at the federal government, because the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act is a federal law. So similar to our structure that we showed earlier, the SHA likewise has many homestead associations on different islands who elect their executive council. Robin Danner serves as the SHA chairwoman right now, and they do policy advocacy, work to unify the SHA leaders, and sharing ideas to help advance the work that they're doing. About the Policy Center. Really the goal of the Policy Center is to bring our organizations together to help bring solutions to the needs that we see in Hawaiian communities. That doesn't mean that every single CNHA member agrees with every single policy position that we take. I hear that often. CNHA doesn't speak for me. No, I don't. CNHA speaks for CNHA. CNHA gets its ideas, gets its public policy priorities from doing convenings like this, from having caucuses every year at our annual convention, from doing quarterly outreach into community across the state to hear from others about what's important to them. And then our board adopts a set of policy priorities that we focus our staff time and energy on throughout the year. So no, we don't speak for everybody. Everybody speaks for themselves. But we do advocate for policy priorities that are adopted by our board. We do lots of publication and research around public policy. And then what I'm going to talk about at the end of the day, civic engagement and a voter initiative. That we really don't care who you vote for, what party you're in, but we do encourage folks to get engaged in the Vote to Rise initiative so that our Native Hawaiian voices have a place in the decisions being made by elected officials. So we're going to remind ourselves today about 3 laws that are very important to our existence as Native Hawaiians, particularly if you're living on the homesteads. How many of you have actually read the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act? Awesome. Some of you know it very well, I know, and some not so much. But I think that it's, in order for us to be good advocates, when we talk about how do you change public policy, number one, we need to know, well, what is it that we want to change? If we don't know what it already says, then it's very difficult to decide what needs changing, what's being implemented well and what's not being implemented well. So we're going to take a look at the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1921, the Admissions Act of 59, and then the Hawaiian Homeland Recovery Act of 1995. And it's really not enough to know one without the other because they are directly related in many ways. And so it's important to take a look at specific sections of all 3 of these acts. So we're going to start with the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act at the core and walk through each of the 27 sections. It's not a very long act. There are 27 sections of the act, but we're going to look at them one by one and then engage in a dialogue about what's working, what's not working, and then how do we take steps to make public policy change on the things that we don't think are working. So first, the definition of any word in the act is in Section 201. Section 201 is just about definitions. It outlines all of the definitions in the act itself. And then Section 201.1 is the purpose. So I'm just going to read the purpose so that we're all starting on the same page. But it says, a permanent land base for Native Hawaiians to live, to farm, to ranch, to engage in commercial activities in a prompt and efficient manner. It says to provide water and supporting infrastructure. It says it will provide technical and financial assistance to enhance the economic self-sufficiency so that Native Hawaiians are forever self-sustaining. We're all good with that? Section 201, the purpose. So, many people will say the purpose of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act was never approved by Congress. It wasn't, not yet. However, we're going to talk about this a little bit later. Section 201, the purpose of the act, and when the federal government needs to get engaged, is if it is diminishing a benefit to the beneficiaries. I don't think that anything in Section 201 is diminishing a benefit to the beneficiaries, and therefore the state is acting on this purpose. Are they acting efficiently, in a prompt and efficient manner? I think folks who have been on the wait list would highly disagree. I think many of us who are living on the land highly disagree. And so what we need to do is understand what the law says and what can we do to make them more efficient, right? Section 202 of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act lays out the governing body of the commission. How are commissioners appointed? So our commissioners today are appointed by an elected governor. He gets to decide who's going to be on the body. And then there are 9 commissioners representing the various islands. There are more on Oahu, and in the last legislature, there was a move to get a commissioner from the island of Lanai. That was approved by the state legislature, and so now there will be a Lanai commissioner. So that was an active movement by Maui Nui, actually. Yes. They have to be from Lanai. So right now there are 9 commissioners. So ironically, the original act, and Bill, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it called for 7, right? 5. Or 5. And that the majority had to be Native Hawaiians. And then it changed, you're right, so it was 5, the majority had to be Native Hawaiian, so that was 3 of the 5. Now we're up to 9, but it's still saying, we didn't change how many have to be Native Hawaiian. Although right now there are Native Hawaiians on that board, and there are beneficiary Hawaiians who live on the land that are on that board. But a good thing to point out and to look at, that's not everyone agrees with the appointment of commissioners by the governor to be appointed to the commission, right? That really then those commissioners are beholden to the governor, and we want those commissioners to be beholden to the people, that their job is really about advocating for the needs of beneficiaries. And so we've talked about different ways to have that done. We've talked with the Shaw on some of the advocacy that they've done, and again, not everybody might agree with that, but they're talking about having recommendations by beneficiaries that then get presented, or following the same way that they do the judicial branch. One gets appointed by this body, one gets appointed by this body, but anybody selected by the governor would have to actually be a recommendation from beneficiaries themselves. So that's, you had a question, correct?
How do you define Native Hawaiian?
In the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, Native Hawaiian, when we're talking about the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, everybody knows the difference between small N and big N. So small N Hawaiian is a Native Hawaiian as defined by this law, Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which means they have to have at least 50% blood quantum or more. A big N, the larger body of Hawaiians, any amount of blood quantum. And it's a very, very contentious and divisive label within the Hawaiian community. I want us to remember that we didn't make that for ourselves. That was because of law, right? That was the federal government in passing the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. Kuhio didn't ask for 50% blood quantum, but he was a delegate in Congress. He advocated for the set-aside of 200,000 acres of land, and that's where they ended up. That's where the negotiation ended up, and that's where they settled. So, as the law reads, you have to be 50% Hawaiian. We don't have to love it. We can work to change that, but that is what happened. That Kuhio didn't say, nah, never mind, since you're not going to agree to 1/32, we're going to leave the land. He secured the 200,000 acres of land, and ended up at a 50% blood quantum. So when we're talking about Native Hawaiian, that's what we're talking about as it relates to the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act is a small N Native Hawaiian, 50% or more blood quantum, and other acts don't have that same, sorry, I keep walking in front of them. Okay, section 203, 25 more sections, our original land inventory. So 203 is pages and pages of meets and bounds. It tells you exactly what the land inventory of those 200,000 acres are that make up the Hawaiian Homeland Trust. In section 204, it says, and this is a very important section, yes?
When did we ever survey the land?
Yes, I saw your recommendation to DHHL, and again, that's a policy priority that we want to push right now. The inventory as identified in the Act, what's in the trust, is in section 203. If we want an actual surveyed inventory of land, and other natives have done it in Indian country, require that to be done by the DOI, then that's something that we need to work on. But no, you're correct. There is not a formal surveyed inventory. The description of the meets and bounds is described in section 203.
It always ends more or less.
Yeah, more or less, more or less,
Always
yes.
ends there.
The actual survey. Right. There you go.
All of a sudden it's missing.
I was going to say, I've never,
Because it'll be absolute instead of,
instead of more or less, right? So it's not deleted, it's omitted. It's omitted, right? I hear you. It's there, but it's been omitted. So, section 204, lands not required by Hawaiians. This is an important section of the Act. This was added to the Act, section 204. Section 204 says that lands may only go to non-beneficiaries, the general public, if they are not required for homesteading by Hawaiians. That lands can be leased to the general public only if they are not required for homesteading by Hawaiians. So Hawaiians on this item, you think we could have put Hawaiians where we have Safeway, or Walmart, or Target? Those are all Hawaiian homelands leased to the general public. Right? So, section 204 says if they are not required, and I would argue that those were required because your wait list is still not addressed. And right behind Target and all of that, you have your ag lots, Pane'ewa homestead. And so we shouldn't have a wait list. So, again, section 204, very important. We need to pay attention. I live in the homestead in Kaupea, in Kapolei, and where we built the mall. And right across the street is a beautiful subdivision called Kanihili Hawaiian Homestead. Could we have built another Kanihili? Yes. But instead, we gave that acreage up for a mall. And the reasoning behind that is because the state is saying, we're leasing your land so that we can generate revenue, so that we can put more people on the land. And until we start seeing the revenue generation and the direct revenues going directly to placing people on the land, then that's not acceptable to me, nor should it be acceptable to any other homesteader. It was the basis of the Nelson lawsuit, and they lost. Right? Nelson said, you can't lease our land, and you have been, and now they lost. Because those lands from the leases were going directly to support staffing and administrative costs at the state agency. That's not going directly to put Hawaiians on land. That was directly to pay the payroll of the state agency. That's why the Nelson lawsuit was won. It also says in section 204 that also authorizes trust lands to be exchanged with the approval of the federal DOI, and that DHHL can assemble lands for residential development. And so, again, land exchanges under 204 says with the approval of the DOI. A couple years back, CNHA advocated hard for federal rules, Part 47 and 48. And some people were opposed to our advocacy around those rules. I'm not sure why, but I want you to understand that one of the reasons why we did is because there needed to be a rule to implement this section of the law. That this law says that the lands cannot be exchanged without the approval of the DOI. Well, guess what? Where I live in Kapolei, where the rail starts, the very first rail station, guess where that is? On Hawaiian homelands. And guess who has that land right now? The city and county. Did the city and county let us know about that exchange? No. Did the state get approval by the DOI for that to start? No. They started already. So if the DOI says no, you think they're going to move the rail off our land? No. That is why we advocated for the rule, to put stoppers in place to say, you can't do the exchange and then come at the end. You can't do the exchange and then come back to tell us. The rule was about putting into effect beneficiary consultation that says, before you even attempt to do an exchange, you have to go and consult with the beneficiaries of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. You have to let them know what you're doing. Then you have to, DHHL, show us that you consulted with your beneficiaries, that they are supportive of this, and then that has to be submitted to the DOI for approval. But what has been happening is exchanges go in and out of the trust without any of that happening, without DOI approval, and then they move within the state law that says we can do government-to-government agency transactions on our own without that. Hence, the rail is going to start off on Hawaiian homelands. Okay? Section 205 says land sold or leased, that the state must comply with the parameters of the act as necessary to complete agreements on land at time of enactment. Again, if you're going to sell or lease land. Right? Another reason why Part 47 and 48. We needed to implement rules that says how do you implement the act. When you're going to do a land exchange, when you're going to do, what are the rules? What are the steps that you're going to take in place? For years and years as beneficiaries, we always wonder, why is it so screwed up? Why do we have to deal with an agency that moves so slow? Why are there so many problems? Both at the state and federal level, whenever a law is passed, the next step, once an act becomes a law, is that you implement a set of rules so that we know how you're going to govern that law. Right? In the state of Hawaii, they pass a law, they pass administrative rules, so we know how that law is going to be implemented. In 1921, when the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act went into effect, our champion, Prince Kuhio, died in 1922. Nobody cared. There were never a set of federal rules to implement the federal law. Never. 100 years later, the first rules, which is why we advocated for Part 47 and 48, is create the rules around how you can exchange our land. Create the rules on how you can amend our act. Imagine any other law that didn't have rules for implementation. And so what we were left with was this swinging pendulum that any time we have a new governor, this governor's interpretation of the law is here, this governor's interpretation of the law is here, and so we have a state agency that has its own interpretation of the law, highly implementing Section 204, leasing our land to the general public, while we still have a long wait list. So there needs to be effective rules to implement that law, otherwise we have what we've been having. So I do think that there are other sets of rules that we need to help us. Not everybody agrees that the feds should have a say, but our position is that it is a federal law. Whether we like the feds or we don't like the feds, the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act is a federal law. 22 more sections to walk through. Section 206 says that the state governor, the Board of Land and Natural Resources, and its authority. The Gov and the BLNR do not have the same authority as the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act commissioners unless otherwise authorized. So we are not just Hawaii state public lands. The trust is the trust. Our lands are not equivalent to Department of Land and Natural Resources lands. These lands sit in trust for the benefit and the purpose as identified in the Act and for the betterment of the Native Hawaiian beneficiaries. Section 207, if there's ever a section of the Act that you know and you know well, Section 207 is the part of the Act that is us. 207 is what the Act was intended for. It says lands are first and foremost without prohibition for homesteading for Hawaiians, whether that's for homes, farms, or ranches. This is the heart and soul of the Act, Section 207 of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. It says after that after you have lands for our people to have homes, farms, and ranches, then you use those lands for their churches, their nonprofits, for their community organizations. And then after that, it says in Section 207, mercantile by Hawaiians. Only by Hawaiians or Native Hawaiian controlled organizations. Is Target a Native Hawaiian controlled organization? Do you know of Native Hawaiians who have small businesses that want to do business on our land? Yes. Absolutely. We are the purpose of the Act. Section 207 says it loud and clear, yet we're missing. In 100 years, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands has issued one mercantile license. A single mercantile license. Yet, more than the homesteading purposes, over 60,000 acres of our land are under general lease. Under Section 204, the non-homesteading purpose. Something is wrong. We're missing in our advocacy, right? So, Section 208, 207, 207, 207, remember that. That's the most important heart and soul part of your Act. Section 208, terms of the homestead leases. It defines our eligibility as beneficiaries for homestead and mercantile leases and licenses. It says what those maximum terms are, who can transfer, the successor eligibility, and if you can put mortgages on those instruments or not. So the department, not too long ago, when Governor Ige first came on board, we don't know what it looks like yet, but they canceled that revocable permit program, right? Lots of newspaper coverage about revocable permit, it's month by month. And so now we don't have a revocable permit program, we have something that they call a right of entry, which essentially is just a revocable permit. It's a month-to-month with right of entry. We just gave it a different name. So on Hawaiian homelands, you can have revocable or right of entries, you can have licenses, or you can have general leases, or you can be a homesteader. And it's important for us to understand that until the Section 207 needs are met, which any of us can argue that those are not met with 27,000 people sitting on a wait list of any kind, whether that is a ranch, ag, or residential wait list, that there's always going to be need as long as there are folks on the wait list. So we shouldn't have any non-homesteading licensed general leases, etc., right? But we do. And in fact, we have more land in the non-homesteading than we have in the homesteading. Okay, 19 more sections. 209, the lease disposition at death of a beneficiary. It describes your options for successorship, for the improvement value, and options if you have no successor. So is everyone familiar about the successorship options? You have to be 50% to get your lease. You can transfer your lease in life or death to somebody who's a quarter. Just in the last legislature, the state passed, it hasn't been approved yet by Congress, but the state did pass a law that says, yes, you can transfer your successor down to 1/32. The 1/32? Yes. Yes, 1/32. Again, people ask me all the time, well, why how come CNHA didn't support that? We support it, going down to 1/32nd, but I thought it was very weak of a law. Number one, you can only do it in death. Whereas today, if you are 50% and you want to transfer that to your child, your grandchild, your spouse, and prepare for whatever life circumstance is going to give you, you can do that in life. What happened at the state legislature is you can only pass that successorship to 1/32nd. So if you're a quarter, you got a lease from your dad, your grandma, and your grandpa, and you're a quarter Hawaiian living on the trust land right now, and you get sick, and you say to your son, I'm going to transfer this lease to you now because I don't know what's going to happen to me. You cannot. The law that was just passed said you can only transfer it to your successor at 1/32nd when you're dead. By naming who your successor is going to be. So you have to go into DHHO, you fill out your successorship form. I don't agree with it either. I think that we should have made that eligible in life, right? That you don't know what life, I mean, if your parents have to go to a home, God forbid, for whatever reason, where you're preparing for a life circumstance, that law does give us the benefit of successorship to 1/32nd, but it only gives that benefit in death, not in life. So that's problematic, right? And then there are folks who say, well, we shouldn't be switching it all the way down to 1/32nd because when you go down to 1/32nd, what about all the guys on the wait list who are still 50% and they never got theirs yet? That you're giving it to somebody that down the line at 1/32nd blood quantum and the 50%ers are still waiting. So we have had great debates over this at CNHA, at the SHA, and where we ended up was that we would support successorship to any blood quantum, right? That we support successorship in perpetuity. I would rather we not have a number, that once you get your lease, Cassandra, here's your homestead lease, you're 50% Hawaiian, that as long as anybody in this genealogy can prove relationship to Cassandra forever and ever and ever, perpetual successorship. That's what we support. But, like Kuhio, they suggested 1/32nd, and sure, we'll take 1/32nd, but I don't love everything about it. It's only in death, and it stops at 1/32nd. The other reason why we said only in successorship is because we're dealing with a state agency who for 100 years hasn't been able to address the wait list that we have now. So if we open that to 1/32nd, imagine how long it would take for people to get off the wait list. It's not that we oppose it, but it is that first let's deal with the problem at hand. Let's deal with the thousands that have been waiting and continue to wait. Let's deal with the pain of families who have lost their only 50%er, who's died on the wait list before we can really open. So that we split the baby in half and said, yes, we support successorship all the way in perpetuity, but we will only support it in successorship, not on the wait list until we have more movement on that wait list where DHHO can address its existing wait list. That was a tough one, very tough one. 210 talks about lease cancellations, when the lease can be canceled and the land can be taken back into possession of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Do you guys have community pastures here on Hawaii Island in Waimea? No? Huh. Another good advocacy, right? Not everybody wants it all by themselves, but people could co-op, could meet together. The only one that I really know of that is active and engaging is on Molokai. Right? That they do have one community. It's in my regional plan too. I got them all. Good luck with that. I'm just kidding. But no, that is the step. You get it in your plan. You make sure that they're going to implement it. You follow it all the way through. That's what the plan says. That's what the plan says. But again, the only active one that I know of where people are actually doing a community pasture, ranching together is on Molokai. Talk to you. Okay. And then 212, land management by the Board of Land and Natural Resources, that state lands not under homestead or mercantile can be returned to BLNR if the HHO wants to, but requires a withdrawal clause. It says that in the act. That should not be happening without consultation with us. Because as it says earlier in the act, that our land's not the same as regular DLNR lands. Our lands are set aside in trust for us. Okay? So these are what the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act says. 15 more. Hang in there, we're almost there. 213 says trust fund accounts of Hawaiians. It governs several trust accounts. Is everybody familiar with our trust accounts? Yes, there are 9 trust accounts. Actually, I forgot to print this, and Kamoala so kindly did this for me. Here you go, you're going to have to go hand these out carefully because these actually 20 pages. So what I'm handing out to you right now is actually a summary of the 9 Native Hawaiian Homeland Trust and Special Accounts. There are 9 accounts under DHHL. There are 9 trust accounts. Number 1, the Hawaiian Homelands Administration Account. And what is in the administration account is lease revenues. So it's a special fund. So I've listed all, this is another document that was created by the shop. It lists all the accounts, where the money comes from that goes into that account, and what kind of account it is, whether it's a special account, a revolving account, or a trust account. Okay? The second is an operating fund, and those funds come from water and rental revenue. So there are certain water, Molokai runs its own water source, right? They have, and I think in Waimea you guys have a water source here. Anahola has a water source. So the beneficiaries who get water from the DHHL managed water sources, revenues from those water sources go into that account. The Native Hawaiian Rehabilitation Fund, that is a trust fund. That is 30% of the sugar revenues that goes into the planning department. This is part of the planning department's budget. 30% of the sugar revenues, the sugar lands, that goes into that account. That is a trust fund account. So the special fund account, where it says type special fund and the type. Yes. Right, so that account used to be awesome. It used to generate a lot of money because we actually had sugar in production. Now that there is not sugar in production, that account has dwindled down. So what is his name? Kaleo Manuel and those folks in the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, the planning department, the money, every couple of years they do, you can apply for grants under the Native Hawaiian Development Plan. The monies from that development plan come from the 30% that they receive off the sugar revenues. So the sugar revenues go to DHHL. DHHL creates the Native Hawaiian Development Plan, and they do, so yeah, if you got a recent grant, your recent grant monies came from the 30% sugar revenues. Yep. That's what they fund the Native Hawaiian Development Plan. Yes, we need to address that, another item. So Cassandra, can you help me write down all these great ideas that people come up with as they come up with them, because it could be a potential policy priority moving forward. That yes, those lands are going to, those revenues are going to dry up, and so then what are we going to tell the state that they should be replaced with, right? We're the only state agency, when I say we're the only state agency, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is the only state agency that's constitutionally mandated to be funded by the state. And we had to sue them to even start getting money. While the Hawaii Tourism Authority gets $80 million for the guests, and the natives get zero, right? There's something terribly wrong with that situation that requires us to do advocacy to change that. So good job on Uncle Dickie Nelson, Kaliko Chan, Skippy Awane, and others who had the courage, because it's not hard. I mean, it's not easy to be fighting against the state. They did it, they won, and we're slowly starting to see DHHL is getting a little bit more. But beyond taking DHHL's advocacy, it took us. It takes us beneficiaries to say that money rightfully should be. Yes?
So this rehab money,
The lands that were used for sugar production.
So if it's connected to the lands, using Lahui as an example, that's what I'm about.
Uh-huh.
So they're going from ag and sugar to ag diversified. What would be the difference there?
Right, so we would argue, well, I can tell you, I would still argue that those revenues still should go to this account because it's based on the revenues produced by those lands. That land, I think Kanyala Inc. talked about changing the sugar lands to producing hemp.
Right.
So regardless of what that crop is, those original sugar lands that were defined, those revenues belong in this account. Right. The more important or the scarier part, I would say, is what if they don't do anything with that land and it's not producing money?
Well, they're already, for the last 20 years, Monsanto has been producing corn seed corn.
Right.
On the edges of the EA, on the former sugarcane land, the USDA was always complaining about the smoke, so they would put a big barrier with Monsanto. So for 20 years, we've been missing out on that revenue, obviously.
Right, we should be getting revenue. Yeah, there's still sugar lands, those should still be our revenues. Right.
Okay.
But again, so that's part of why we're doing this, right? That we have to know what it says, where it comes from, so that we know what we're supposed to be advocating for. Because if we're not paying attention, they're not taking good care of us, right? They're not saying, hey, guess what, Hawaiians, we made an extra 10 million off your land, here you go. No. And in fact, when it comes to OHA, who gets their revenue from ceded lands, we generate more than $15 million a year on ceded land revenues. But when they didn't like the amount of money that they were going to have to give the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, they said, oh yeah, 20% of the ceded land revenues up to and not exceeding 15 million. Right? They just put that cap there. Again, if we're not advocating for that cap can't be there, guess what? They did it. They're capping us at 15 million. Our lands, the ceded lands, are generating way more revenue than 15 million annually. Right? Okay, so the other accounts, I'm not going to read to them to you over and over. I want to point out though that item number 5, the Hawaiian Homeland's General Loan Fund account, it says in there that you'll collect principal payments. Those are revolving loan funds, and then the Hawaiian Homeland's Loan Fund account, number 4 and 5, those are revolving revenue streams. Because when you looked at the purpose of the act, it said farming, ranching, housing in an efficient manner, providing financing. How many of you in here got a DHHL loan? Awesome. 1. You live, which homestead do you live in? On it. So, awesome example, the older homesteads on that were built earlier had only one revenue stream. They only had, the way to be financed was you had to get a direct loan from the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. So some of the older homestead subdivisions have homestead lots. So think about this. We have 200,000 acres of land. Kuhio gets that passed. We have land. We hardly have infrastructure. We don't have water. We don't have roads. They don't give us any money from the state when they become a state, and they say, okay, we'll put Hawaiians on that land, and then we don't even have mortgage financing. FHA did its first mortgage financing in the 80s. Act passed in 1920, 21 implemented. We don't get our first mortgage loan product, a real mortgage loan product like other people who apply wherever they live on fee simple land, until the 80s. So land was land without access to capital to build houses. It's why people were on the wait list forever, or continue to be on the wait list, because even with mortgage loan products now, we have very few. We don't have 30 products to choose from. You can do FHA, you can do USDA, or you can do 184A. Or you can get a direct loan from Hawaiian Homelands if they have money. The importance of that account and what you need to understand about the revolving loan account is that the Act says when Hawaiian Homelands makes loans to beneficiaries and those revenues get paid back, principal should go back into the loan fund and interest should go back into the loan fund unless approved by the Hawaiian Homes Commission. right? That you're supposed to bring that money back and revolve it unless authorized by the Hawaiian Homes Commission. But for years and years and years, every quarter, the administration goes to the commission and says, we generated $4 million in interest revenue this quarter. Please authorize us to transfer it into account number 1, which is Hawaiian Homes Administration Act, because we need to use that to run the operations of the department. So about 5 years ago, CNHA started to advocate that we can't do that. The reason why Hawaiians aren't getting loans is because our own revenue is not coming back into our pot so we can loan it to other Hawaiians. We're taking $4 million out and giving it back to the state agency to pay its employees instead of making loans to our other people. So now in the last year and a half, I'm proud to say that they're starting to not transfer the interest payments into their administrative account. They're finally starting to put it in revolving loan fund accounts, and you are actually seeing them promote doing loans with, they add Nahasla to it. But again, we have to pay attention because otherwise they were just going to the commission saying, can you please move that into our administrative account? It's also how they get past that 204. Remember when I was saying you can only use it unless, so how they get beyond 204 is they write a memo to the commission and they say to the commission, okay, Target wants to lease this land. We put it out for public bid, they're the best bidder. The Act says, under Section 204, that we can only do this if it's not required for homesteading. Please sign off and tell us that this is not required for homesteading. And they do. And poof, Target's over there. Right? So we have to pay attention. We're asking now, what's the due diligence? When you ask the commission to approve that, what's the criteria that you're using to say it's not required? Prove that it's not required. Just saying it's not required and having them sign off on it is not the same as proving that it's not required. But there's nobody watching. Sure, it could be we would have to file a suit to prove that corruption, but sure, I would argue that that's not sufficient proof, right? That just saying it's not required and you know you have 27,000. But again, I don't know how well the Hawaiian Homes Commissioners even read the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. I would hate to say that, but it's true, right? That we want to make sure as homesteaders that we're having leadership that understands the Act, that is going to protect our interests. How come there's not a commissioner saying, hey, you're asking me to transfer the interest, but doesn't the Act say that 90% goes here and 10% goes here?
How do you keep them in order? How do you keep them focused? All these commissioners, how do you keep them focused to the Act and not dilly-dallying all around the place? You know,
How do we keep them focused?
How do you keep them focused? Because we have conversations with them, but they're not focused.
Right, we have to hold them accountable. We have to talk about what they're voting on. We have to be active ourselves to try to make sure.
I think being aggressive with filing lawsuits is more of a realistic approach to these people.
Sure.
Because if we have a community needs, we're talking face to face, and then you leave with a common understanding of
We're
what
going
are
to do
we doing?
this.
Are we going to do the act, or are we going to act out and do something else? And that's where I see everything coming to a halt, is they're acting out, they're not following that. And our commissioners, I hate to say it, but we talk to them all the time. But it's like, I think filing lawsuits is the only appropriate matter at this part.
I think that many beneficiaries have come to that, right? I think that many folks have, like the Nelson lawsuits, you don't want to, but if that's the only other outlet that we have, then that's what people have been doing. And I hate to say that that has been the effective route, but when you look at every suit filed against the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, a beneficiary has never lost. They have won every single suit. It's just that it takes forever, right? That by the time we win that suit, they want to spend all the money in the administrative account by then. Or, you know, so yes, I understand that there is a huge need and that sometimes it requires us to take that kind of action just to fulfill the Act, and it shouldn't have to be that way,
We
right?
just want to fulfill the act.
Right. We just want to fulfill the Act.
This may go back to appointing the commissioners. We, or the
we choosing who those good representatives are, right? Again, advocacy to, okay, we need to change the way Hawaiian Homes Commissioners are appointed because we should be saying who would be a good representative for us, right?
Yeah,
But I think that for a long time, we have been absent. We, the general collective Native Hawaiian voice at various levels of government, not all, there are some who are very active, there are others who are not, but collectively as a unified voice, we've not been actively engaged for them to take us seriously. We've not been where we need to be, so they don't take us seriously. They think they can do whatever they want. And they have, right? They have. I mean, the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act says, in the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, that the Department of Interior has federal oversight up to and including the ability to sue for breach of trust. Again, is there a rule that tells us how we go about that so we know what process to follow? No. That's why we need a rule to say, okay, DOI, how do we get you to file a damn lawsuit for breach of trust? Because right now it's in there, but how does one go about doing that? But definitely there have been breaches. Absolutely there's been breaches. It shut us down. If I get a light, and I can see what page we're on. Maybe it got too hot coming on the light bulb. Okay, what page were we on? 5? So we're on section 214? 215. So the conditions of the loans, it says what the loan limits are, what your ability is to get those loans, and the repayment terms and delinquencies, how the department will handle that. 216, insurance requirements and loan acceleration. It describes that you need to have insurance on your property, etc., etc. It also says in there that we can create our own insurance company. It also says in there that it talks about lien position. So that's been a long time issue on Hawaiian homelands. If you have a fee simple property, as you know, you can have more than one position on your home, right? So you take a mortgage, you buy your house for $200,000. As you pay your mortgage down, you have equity. You can take a second loan out, borrowing your equity to send your kids to college, to start a business, to start farming or ranching. On Hawaiian homelands, we can't do that. That in order to take out the equity, we have to borrow against our whole home because that section of the act says there can only be one position. Yep. Section 216, again, insurance requirements. 217, ejectment for non-payment. It describes the authority of the DHHL to evict or bring legal action against beneficiaries. Next slide. Only 9 more, then we'll take a breather. 218 got repealed. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what 218 was about, but Section 218 was repealed. Section 219, general assistance. The DHHL is to provide assistance to beneficiaries to maximize land utilization. How many people got a loan from DHHL to maximize your land utilization for homesteading, mercantile, and nonprofit purposes? None of us. We're not doing it. It also states that DHHL can form an insurance company or pool to serve beneficiaries. So sometimes on the older properties, it's more difficult to get insurance for whatever reason, that they do have the authority to, if you ever heard of Ameren Insurance Company, those were tribes working together to start their own insurance company because tribal members on Indian reservations couldn't get homeowners insurance, so they created their own insurance company, have their own risk pool, and now they insure their own people. It's called Ameren. They did it themselves.
Can you spell that?
AMERIND. Section 220, developer agreements, projects, and bonds. It says that water development requirements, it talks about the authority of the department to develop lands to advance economic and social well-being of beneficiaries, and the legislature's authority to appropriate funds and/or bonds for development on Hawaiian homelands. So I want to just say, in light of that, that yes, under Michael Kauhane, they did float bonds to do specific. What did they float the bond for? Do you guys remember? Under the Kauhane administration, they floated the bond for what? Building the building. The DHHL office. Right? The big DHHL office. So they do have the authority to float bonds to do development. Right? There can be. And one of the things we've been advocating for at the state legislature is that we do have money in our 9 trust accounts. We know that we have some money of our own. However, we are constitutionally mandated, the only agency constitutionally mandated that should get funding. So we need to be able to rely on the legislature to give us a steady flow of capital to help us address the needs of the folks on the wait list. And we should be getting steady allocations of capital improvement project money, CIP money for infrastructure development. That with those steady investments in CIP, then we could see a steady removal of beneficiaries from the wait list. But until we know that we can count on that, it's like this, right? It's what we can raise on our own, whether that's through NAHASDA or trust funds. But the state has an obligation to fund sufficiently the Department of Hawaiian Homelands to do that infrastructure development. Section 2, let's go, next slide. Section 221, water, says that water licenses before and after issued are subject to the water needs of Hawaiian Homelands to supply livestock, farm operations, domestic needs, and shall be granted free of charge. How's that working out for us? I was going to say, I remember the Hilo instance, right? So that's what it says, that's what the act says, and we all go about our own way to implement that act. Section 222, DHHL administration allows the state to make expenditures and/or adopt rules. It requires the state to issue an annual report of finances to the legislature. Almost must report annually on the disposition of the lands and who the lands are for. So have you seen that report yet? So DHHL does that function by posting an annual report. So several years ago, CNHA went through that annual report and went item by item so that we could give a breakdown of who had what land and how much they were paying per acre. It was pitiful, right? But they were doing this function, reporting it to the agency by filing an annual report and just giving a whole bunch of data to the state legislature. Nobody really digested it. But this is how we started to advocate around Section 204, saying, hey, we shouldn't be doing any of those dispositions until we get the other 207 part taken care of, right? But they are doing an annual report. I haven't seen one actually, as you said, Bill, that we haven't seen an annual report for the last 3 years out of this administration. Yeah. That is a requirement. They used to do an annual report to the state legislature before the legislature closed to report on who had all the land. And the other thing I think that we need to make sure that they're doing is not only who has the land, but is that land to an eligible beneficiary or not? Right? And then 223, federal oversight, that Congress reserves the right to alter, amend, or repeal provisions of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. Go ahead. The last four, Section 224 around sanitation and reclamation, that it should be a DOI designee to live in the state with expertise in sanitation, rehabilitation, reclamation.
That's one of my proposals, because in the book, a lot of the leases are coming to be expired. So you have to go back to the original list. What was the condition of the land prior, and what was the end of the lease, do we have to bring it back to the way it was? Do they have to take up all the contaminated soil? I mean, that's why I pointed to action 20, 22, 23, 24 in the Kanawa industrial area. A lot of them are coming to you. And we don't have nobody taking it.
I'm sorry, Ken.
Right.
So, put that down there too, the Monticello lands. Yes, so again, all of these issues continue to happen around us. We have to stay on it. We have to work together. We have to pay attention. You know, whether people support or don't support TMT and Monticello. Advocates did a good job in raising awareness. Advocates got change. Advocates made people aware of what was happening there because there was a collective working together, raising of voices of people, and you saw people take action and got reaction, right? I just saw that OHA is now going to sue. They went all the way from supporting it to they're going to sue, right? So it really takes active participation by us, the citizens, to let elected officials know what is important to us to make that stuff happen. Yes?
Can I say that what they were addressing was not, what he was addressing was not talking about the adventures up there. He was talking about
The land, yeah. And the erasing. Yes. So my point in making that comparison is just that now we need to follow that. We need to make sure that before those lands are returned, if they are, that they're returned in a certain condition. But they're not going to be returned in a condition unless we collectively work together to raise that awareness. And I'm comparing it to like the awareness of, there was lots of awareness. Whether you were for or against it, you knew what was going on up there because they raised the awareness level of what they were not happy about and hence change, right? So 225, investment and accounting requirements, describes what investments are allowed, how receipts are to be handled, donations and other fiscal actions by the department. Qualifications for other federal programs. 226 in the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act establishes that DHHL is eligible to participate in any federal program that renders assistance in the areas mandated to be implemented. And we've never really gone after that as a state agency, right? A couple years ago, several years ago, Michael was still at the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. CNHA at that time had advocated for water and wastewater. $5 million a year for water and wastewater to be in the USDA budget, specifically for Hawaiian Homelands. 5 years later, $25 million was still sitting in that pot of money. Right? So we need to make sure, again, even in our advocacy, and when our advocacy is effective, we need to be working so that they actually spend that money, otherwise it goes away. But when you think about, do we need roads? Do we need water development? Do we need green energy improvements? Yes. What Section 226 of the federal law says is that DHHL, our state administration, is eligible to go to the feds and get assistance for any of the purposes of the act, but we don't pursue it.
Or the commissioners don't hear it.
Or they don't hear it, or they don't, right. I mean, and the commission is not running the day-to-day operation, the administration is, right? So we need collaboration at all levels, at the commission level, at the administrative level, etc. Yes? Yes? Department. It establishes that they're eligible to, right, the commissioners are the ones that still have to approve that. But again, right, think about the commission, which is, it's problematic. There are a bunch of volunteers who have day jobs and once a month show up at a commission meeting for 2 days. They get a packet maybe 3 days before their meeting, try to read all that and digest it. Some may have read the act, some may have not, but so it's not the most effective
And I think,
governing body.
and I think that's the, oh, no, no.
I'm sorry.
Hawaiian Homes Commissioners, gosh.
They have a big kuleana, but they're all 9 volunteers who we put all our confidence in 9 volunteers and
Appointed, yeah? But they're appointed.
they're appointed by the
And
governor.
I think that's where the,
Made it appointed by the governor.
Department of Hawaiian the Commission's powers.
In 1963.
1963, yeah. The authorization power went to the department versus the original one.
Well, there's all kinds of things that the state believes it has power to do. Our position, and not everybody agrees with us, but CNHA's position and what CNHA has done in our advocacy is say that there is a compact between the federal government and the state, and in order for statehood to happen, and when you made us a state and took those lands, there was still a compact agreement said the federal the DOI was still going to have federal oversight. And so I don't want to talk to the state agency. I don't deal with the state agency for my own reasons, but also for the state hasn't done a very good job. And so I want a direct relationship with the federal agency who has the power to file suit for breach of trust, right? There is a breach of trust going on here. I want to deal with you. Whether I love them or don't love them, it is a federal act, so we choose to deal with the federal agency to enforce that. That you don't get to give up that compact agreement. Because in I forget what exact year, it was in the 80s, Ray Soon was the chairman. The general leasing policy of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, the 204 section, 204, the act says that priority for any lands is to Native Hawaiians. So even when you were going to bid, say, on Walmart, if a Native Hawaiian came forward, the act says that we have priority, we have preference. The act says Hawaiians have preference in job placement in the Department of Hawaiian Homelands.
So that's 206.
Right, that's 206. But what I'm saying is that they're not,
Governor, all of land and natural resources, and all of that, under the jurisdiction of Hawaiian.
yes, they don't have jurisdiction on Hawaiian Homelands. So, right, so DHHL said somewhere in the 80s that we're not going to give preference anymore to Hawaiians because here we have a handful of leases. I think there was like 9, there weren't very many at the time, in general leasing. And the majority of them, 5, were Hawaiians and 4 were non-Hawaiians. And the instance of delinquency amongst Hawaiians is greater than non-Hawaiians. Therefore, preference is not really helping them. So we're going to just bid it out for general use to the general public. Now, was that right? No. Right, 1986, there you go. I know it was in the 80s, that was under racing. So they just took away, by a stroke of a pen, 9 volunteer guys at the commission that, yeah, that seems like a good idea. We're going to take away the preference. And then for the last years since 1986, they've acted on that policy. Terrible. And implemented, so here's the thing about federal law, state law. They implemented a state admin rules, right? Chapter 191, that says this is how you put lands out for general public use. Well, when you're absent of federal law, if there was a federal law, a federal rule in place, it would trump that state law, but no more. So we follow Chapter 191. Again, that's why we were advocates for federal rules. Not everybody agrees with us, but when you can't follow the state law, or when the state law is acting in opposition to the act, then they go and say, okay, where's the federal one say? Well, guess what? The more federal ones, so the state gets away with what the state gets away with. Without an admin rule to implement that law. Right. We're going to talk about the Admissions Act next. Again, we have to understand all those laws so that we better exercise our rights. Yes?
So in Hawaiian Homes Commission meetings,
Yes.
can we put ourselves on the agenda, and if you, something like this example, you're saying what they're doing,
Yes.
can we propose that they change it back to what it was and bring up to light what they're doing and how it's given a disadvantage to the Hawaiians? Can we?
Yes, we can and we should do it every single time. Here's the problem that we're having on the Hawaiian Homes Commission agenda. The agenda is controlled by the chairperson. I request to be on the agenda every single month. I'll figure out something to tell them about every single month, practically. And the only place I get to be is the J agenda. And that means they can't talk to me, they can't really take a vote, it's just, wala, tell me about your problem, I'll sleep on it. Right? That's how, what is that?
I said even if we get to you. Because that's
Yeah,
what we have to
even if we get to you. I go to lots of Hawaiian Homes Commission meetings. Lots of them. Almost all of them. And that is a problem. Again, we have only one person that controls what's on the agenda. Every non-Hawaiian is on the voting agenda. You look on the J agenda. Only beneficiaries are on the J agenda. That's a problem. And are they changing that? No, because they only see the same. When we come to Hilo, I can tell you who's going to testify. Pat, Mr. Brown, Uncle Pat, maybe Mapu, maybe Makubu, right? It's the same people over and over. So they look at us and go, yep, there they are again. Those guys are testifying, maybe Mike Hudson. Then when you go Kona, Uncle Bokahui, Diane, Ron Kodani, they look at the same 12 guys and say, yep, they're coming, we know. They sit back, put their legs up underneath their desk and listen, and they don't take any action. So we have a hard time getting on the voting agenda. We're always on the J agenda. That's a problem. Yes?
So the district representatives from each area, would they be able to get on the voting agenda?
That's an interesting, would the elected officials from this area be able to get on the voting agenda? I don't know, tell them to try. If they do, I'd be really pissed off. Careful what we ask for, right? They'll be under the J agenda too.
You want the K, that's the one. The K agenda. Then they have to make a decision.
Is there anything in the act that says about that?
Nope.
In the K agenda?
No, but we could amend the act and add it, right? I'm being serious. Those are the things that we need to think about. But first we need to raise awareness so we know what things make us frustrated for sure. We don't always understand how did we get to this frustration? And then now how do we create a solution to deal with this frustration so we can get better results?
So like when you're saying, the appointed those nine
Commissioners.
how do you lose track of the fundamentals of being, that they elected from previous, of the original act? How did we go so, how much time did Congress actually, the federal oversight to make all these agenda changes that they did, all these amendments? How much time has the federal government implemented the oversight of all these changes? And really,
Zero.
and that's what I'm trying to say.
Right, so what happened in the state of Hawaii, that's what we're going to talk about next, that when we became a state in the Admissions Act, the 1959 Admissions Act, they said, okay, Hawaii, you're gonna become a state, we're going to take all that land, we're going to dump the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, the 1920, the Act of 1920, implemented in 21, and embedded in the Hawaii State Constitution. So the Admissions Act, so now the feds have been hands off. Let the state deal with them. That we incorporated that into part of the Admissions Act, and then the state said, and now we're going to implement administrative rules. And so they follow, the State Department of Hawaiian Homelands follows administrative rules. They made a rule to say how the commission is going to get appointed by its governor. So now all the state level implemented rules are what they're following, which is again why not everyone agrees with CNHA's position. I don't care if it's in the Admissions Act. There was still a compact that said the feds have oversight. And a tip, right? So that's, and there's different strategies. And not everybody has to agree with that strategy, but I think that as Hawaiians, collectively, we need to say, okay, this is going to be our strategy. Don't get mad at me, this is just my strategy. You implement your strategy. You want to deal with them on the state, or you want to deal with, we don't need any of you, everybody get out, you can deal with that too. There's not this or this or this. I think it's all of those things. All of us implementing every strategy we can so that we're better having control over what is rightfully ours, but that just hasn't been happening. And then the last one, Section 227, Enterprise Zones, allows participation in federal or state enterprise zones. So for those of you who are familiar with enterprise zones, if you're designated an enterprise zone, it basically gives you procurement rights for bidding on contracts, that there are things that you don't have to do that other contractors, we don't implement in enterprise zones. We're not implementing it. It also gives priority for hiring Native Hawaiians. A lot of 8A federal programs use enterprise zones, but it's not something we actually enforced or implemented. Okay, we're going to take a break for like 15 minutes. Please eat food because it's there. Get some water, stretch, and then we'll continue after that, okay? It is 11:45, so 12 o'clock. Let's get back. You're very welcome. I'm going to go back to the Admissions Act. Please help us eat that food. Okay, cool. Yeah. Hold on. Thank you. It's what? Oh, the surge protector broke. Gotcha. You walked through all that. Okay. So, you guys keep eating. Don't let me interrupt you. I'm just going to finish up this section. That awesome. We think that the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act is a brilliant land trust law. As we talked about earlier, Kudio says in Section 207, give my people land for their homes, to grow food, to raise their livestock, give them lands for their nonprofits, their public purposes, their churches, and then give our people lands for their mercantile businesses. And then if there are lands outside of the purposes, then lease those lands under Section 204 to the general public, if they're not required for homesteading. He then says, make access to water and capital available for those purposes, for homes, farms, and ranches, and for mercantile. So, you have a brilliant law that creates a land trust, and as we talked about this morning, and go back and forth, it's poorly administered by the feds, it is poorly administered by the state, and it is poorly advocated by us. So part of the reason for doing this is that yes, I'm frustrated with the state for the way that it's administered. I'm frustrated with the feds for them not doing their oversight responsibilities. But I also embrace that kuleana to say I'm frustrated with me, myself, my family, my neighbors, my community for not doing more to advocate for what we know that they might not know, and we are where we are because we all have a role in that, okay? Hi, Mike! That's my brother. Coaching them at club.
Touchdown.
Yeah. Woohoo! We can cheer from in here. So, beneficiaries, we must not wait for others. We must push the state to do a better job. We must push the feds for better oversight. And we must push ourselves to know our rights and to advocate for them. Okay? Huh? It is that I am frustrated with the state, as many are, and I am frustrated with the feds, as many are. But I accept my kuleana that I can be frustrated with them, and then what? What am I to do about it, right? So we have to do something about it. So in 1959, the Hawaii Admissions Act. We're really just going to talk about two sections of the Hawaii Admissions Act that are applicable. Section 4, as a compact with the United States, we talked a little bit about this earlier with Uncle here. The United States relating to the management and disposition of Hawaiian homelands, the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act shall be adopted as a provision of the Constitution of the new state and may only be amended or repealed with the consent of the federal government. That's what it says in the Admissions Act. Without federal consent, so they can change, there have been amendments to the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, 94 of them to be exact. The Hawaiian Homes Commission Act as amended, if the Hawaiian Homes Commission, or if the state legislature makes an amendment to the act that approves by the legislature, it has to be approved at the federal level by Congress if it diminishes a right to a beneficiary. If it is seen to if it's not seen to diminish the rights of beneficiaries, then it doesn't require. So the process goes like this. For example, what just happened in the legislature, dropping the blood quantum to 1/32. Gets passed at the state legislature. The state legislature, the chair at the Department of Hawaiian Homelands receives a copy of that law. Now, bill came along. We're going to amend the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. So she will write up now an argument or the position of the Department of Hawaiian Homeland saying, here's the work that we did around reducing that blood quantum. Here's what we did to talk to beneficiaries. Here's what happened at the state legislature. Here's who testified at the legislature. And here you go, Attorney General. Can you give us your opinion and tell us whether or not you think this needs to be approved by Congress? Once she gets that opinion back from the Attorney General, he will either say yes or no. So guess what? In 1987, when did they amend the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act for 1/4? 86 was reduction to 1/4 successor. The Attorney General said, no, that's not diminishing a beneficiary right. Although 50%ers on the wait list say, oh yes it is, because if you're giving it to them, why wouldn't you give it to me? So there's been this ongoing conversation saying, well, was Kuhio's intent that once you run out of blood quantum, then there's no more Hawaiians to serve? Or do you think Kuhio's intent, well, we don't know what Kuhio's intent was, so there's arguments back and forth about that. But at the bottom line is, if they find it not to decrease a beneficiary, if it's increasing a benefit to a beneficiary, it does not require federal consent, but if it is, it does. 1/32 is definitely going to require. We needed consent by Congress to the 1/4, and we're going to need it for 1/32. Did you have a question? Oh, no. Okay. Section 4 continues to say all proceeds and income from trust lands shall be used only in carrying out the provisions of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. For example, the use of $500,000 in trust funds for the state's homeless. So, Section 4 says all proceeds that come from the trust, Hawaiian homelands, lands, can only be used for purposes of the Act. Kaulana Park was assigned to work at the homeless. He was the homeless czar, right? He was the face of homeless under the legal administration. We funded that. Our trust dollars funded that. Right? So we need to pay attention on where our trust dollars are getting used. We have lots of Native Hawaiians who are homeless, yes. Is it a purpose of the Act? No. So again, we have to just keep our eye on the prize, right? To say, how are our trust dollars being used? And should those state funds be used for other things than the purposes of the Act? Section 5B, the United States grants to the state of Hawaii, effective upon its admission into the Union, title to all public, those are the ceded lands, to all lands defined by Section 203 of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. What was 203 again? You remember? Title 48? What is Section 203 saying? Yes, lays out the Hawaiian Homes defines the land on each island that are in the actual Hawaiian Homelands Trust, right? The more or less verbiage, right? That all lands defined by Section 203 of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. So any of the lands identified in the trust. So they're getting all of the state admissions into the union, title to all public lands, all the ceded lands, and to all lands defined by the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. Section 5F of the Hawaii Admissions Act. There's a lot of, yeah, that's what we just talked about, yes. The ceded lands. Who took it back from the state? Okay. You want to talk to us about that? The 86 Congress took the lands back from the state. So the ceded lands revenue that the state is giving to OHA is coming from where? Not the ceded lands? Right. So we're going to go to Section 5F of the Hawaii Admissions Act says that lands granted to the state of Hawaii, together with its proceeds, shall be held in public trust for 5 specific purposes. Public schools, Native Hawaiians as defined by the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, and this is again where big N, small n gets to be very frustrating and contentious amongst Native Hawaiian communities. How's it going? Farming, home ownership, and public use. Right? So, again, back to the ceded land revenue that goes to OHA and for the 5 purposes, the 5F purposes. So OHA beneficiaries, some people will say, DHHL deals with the small ends and OHA deals with the big ends. No, OHA deals with both ends. That the small ends are part of the big ends. And this law says so, right? That you're part, as identified by Section 5F of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. 5F. Yes. 5F is specific to the small end. Not the big end of 1920. Of 1920. Yes. Not 21 as amended, but 1920. Gotcha. I agree.
So, state of Hawaii.
Okay. I hear you. I'm going to the next slide.
Section 4. 3.
Okay, read us Section 3.
That all proceeds and income from available land as defined by said act shall be used only in carrying out the provisions of said act. Section 4 contains the Hawaiian Homes
Commission Act.
all the proceeds and income.
Right, so Section 4 says, all proceeds and income from trust land shall be used only in carrying out the provisions of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. That's why we need to understand the laws. Is that happening? No, exactly. Right.
Right below there.
Yes, correct. That's exactly why we're looking at all of these 3 laws, right? It is, definitely. But are we fighting breaches of trust? No. Right? So those are the short sections. That's only 2 sections that as Hawaiians we really, that ties everything together. That what does the Admissions Act, even when we became a state, what does it say? Those are what the Admissions Act says. Short sections, but very powerful impact. Hawaiians must know what's in the law and advocate for the implementation of that. Otherwise, if we don't, you're correct, Uncle, I hear you. That it specifically defines the small N Hawaiian of the 1920 HHCA. And is that happening? No, it's not. That's why we're reviewing these laws. And then the last law in 1995, Yay for Senator Akaka, the Hawaiian Homelands Recovery Act. He sponsored this law and got it passed with the help of Senator Stevens in Alaska to require that the federal government convey lands or cash value for trust lands that the feds took over use from August 1959. It was known as the Lost Use by Hawaiians Land Act, or the Hawaiian Homelands Recovery Act, and that's where we got the return of some of our lands into the trust. That they were not the original inventory, but Senator Akaka passed the Hawaiian Homelands Recovery Act. So in Barbers Point, close to where we live in Kapolei, those lands were returned. On Kauai, the Waialua homestead lots, those lands were returned under the Hawaiian Homelands Recovery Act. One of the areas that I believe we do need to continue advocating for is in this area, that there are still federal lands, many of you here, Pohakuloa and others, that must eventually be returned to our land trust. Right? That there are lands that are still remaining, and they still owe us, even under the Hawaiian Homes Recovery Act. The Hawaiian Homelands Recovery Act, there are still an outstanding, DHHL has an inventory of those lands that were returned to us, but there are still more lands that are owed, and we should pursue that.
Just out of curiosity, you know, the first time we heard about it, how do we know? Because we never surveyed the land. I would like to know the start and the progression to today, that all of us should know what transpired in the past.
Yes.
Unless you know that, how can you?
We don't know that, and that's the same thing we've heard with the city land. We've been talking about that forever. Who has the actual inventory of, so I can tell you that a couple of years back when CNHA and the Shaw hosted our first Hawaiian Week in DC, that was a question posed by Mike Hudson of your item to the DOI themselves. So when are we going to get an actual, why aren't you funding, if we don't have one, the actual inventory with specific means and bounds if it's been omitted? We need it to be resubmitted and discovered so that we can see what that is. But I agree, yeah, when we get the kingdom back. We need to know before then, because until our kingdom gets fully restored, it's just a crapshoot, right? We don't know exactly. I hear what you're saying. You have Title 48?
I think that's.
Maybe we should give them a copy and say, could you please publish this? So he sponsored the law, got it passed, and it's how we got those lands back. There are still more lands owed to us, but that is really what the Hawaiian Homelands Recovery Act is. So 201 talks about, it's just the title of the act. 202, all the conditions again. 203 lays out how the valuation of trust lands that were taken for use by the feds will get done. So it lays out. So again, when CNHA advocated for Part 47 and 48, the argument by the Commission Department of Hawaiian Homelands was, we don't need this rule because it already lays it out in the Hawaiian Homelands Recovery Act. The Hawaiian Homelands Recovery Act says this is how the lands will be valued. This is how the federal lands will be conveyed. It says that it requires consultation with beneficiaries. So we don't need another rule because we had a law. So we had a law and another law. And our argument is there is no implementation of that law. It doesn't tell us how you're going to implement that. So the specific rule will say, if you're going to sell the land, you must publish it. You must consult with us for X amount of days. Within so many days, so it puts timelines and definitive process to, you can't just say it's already there. It's there, but what have you done to implement it? Nothing. It's why the rail is on our land.
Seems like on the site in Lahui, in reference to.
Sure. They can come here and ask you what you think about the Eva drum, right? And it's still happening. So that doesn't mean, again, I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying there's terrible oversight at the federal level. There's terrible implementation at the state level. And there's not enough advocacy amongst ourselves to keep our eye on this. And even for those of us who are keeping our eye on this, clearly we have generations of leaders who have been keeping their eye on this, but they need soldiers They need people who are actually doing the work, doing the advocacy, working together to raise that awareness. Otherwise, we are where we are.
I have a question. So you
Yes.
have settlement of the lost use of land. You said like, the return of, Hawaiian Homeland Recovery Act, Kapolei, and you said here's the Kauai. Even the harbor in Waianae, if I'm not mistaken, is that Hawaiian Homes? The harbor where these people are living? Is that part of Hawaiian Homes?
Off the top of my head, I wouldn't know, so I wouldn't want to answer that, but I can check for you. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Yeah, 'cause
You mean where that homeless camp is?
well, two of them, right, the Kapolei has like a shelter kind of down there.
Yeah, so in Kapolei, in Kalailoa, where those homeless shelters are, yes, specific ones are on Hawaiian homelands. And I'll tell you this, in right before Lualualei, right in Maili, there's land that is Hawaiian homelands, and the state, again, under the legal administration, they built some homeless shelters. Ulukekukui, I think, is one of them, and two others. And those are homeless shelters on Hawaiian homelands for anybody.
So where's our shelters for our?
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying, that's not right, but
Is that how we do it though? We just find our homesteading places for the family members that, just need a place to feel safe, you know what I mean? And that's what I guess our option is right now, is to assess what we know is possible so we can be in the best position to help our people now. And whether it's just a place to stay, yeah, I think that's kind of like a big thing that we're dealing with up here in the Cook Valley. A lot of our family members are homeless, and there's a wide piece of claim. There's a big popularity about sharing of land use, and through this Hawaiian Homeland Recovery Act, I think it just falls into right with our communities back online. Because if you're telling me that there's a couple of places, all these other places are, and I don't have nothing against them, because they're all in the same situation, but
Sure.
I think we should move forward, and everybody should just support it and not say nothing about it. Because they're already dividing up, they're already giving back from the Recovery Act, and it seems like now we should start getting some for the recovery. I mean,
so the Recovery Act was to get those lands back into the trust. They were never in the trust, right? So some of the Kalailoa land, there are scattered parcels. Some of them are Hawaiian homelands, some of them are not. But whatever they could get their hands on and put back into the Recovery Act, there was a valuation, and then that act allowed us to take some of what our lands are back and put it in the trust. So there are still more, and there are things happening on Hawaiian homelands that are not specifically supporting beneficiaries, like malls and other things. Should we be building shelters or drug rehabs before we build malls? Sure, absolutely.
I think at least have a safe zone.
Yep. That down. Yep, that we should have. Uncle Joe Tassel, when he was on the commission, he really, that was his, that was what drove him. Uncle Joe he wanted land set for, that imprisonment wasn't the way to go, that most people needed rehab, they weren't hardcore criminals, they were on drugs, they needed support, taking them away from their family was not the way that we were going to give them support, that we needed to build safe zones, was to rehabilitate our families. That was definitely Uncle Joe's driving force. 6 more sections to walk through. 204, the procedures for amending the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. Again, Senator laid out the direct instructions and language in the 59 Admissions Act, and it specifically requires DHHL to notify the Secretary of the Interior after enactment has been made. So what we were just talking about, if it passes at the state legislature, they send it to the Attorney General. The Attorney General makes a ruling on whether it's diminishing a benefit to beneficiaries or not, and then Congress takes action. 205, land exchanges. Again, authorize land exchanges instead of conveyances. Problem with land exchanges that we're having at the state level is, again, there are state laws that say if you're a state of government agency and I'm a government agency, we can have these agency-to-agency agreements without involving other people. But for the Hawaiian Homelands Trust, that's not true. There should always be DOI federal oversight. So the last four sections, 206, the administration of the federal government, it mandates that the Department of Interior shall designate an individual to administer the responsibilities of the feds under the Hawaiian Homeland Recovery Act. How many of you know Kimo Kaloi or heard of Kimo Kaloi? Couple. So Kimo Kaloi works in the Office of Native Hawaiian Relations. And some people go, Kimo Kaloi. Kimo Kaloi is one single Hawaiian who's in a huge federal government agency. And whether you agree or disagree, Kimo Kaloi, what Senator Akaka did with the Hawaiian Homelands Recovery Act is saying, how come my people don't have, my Native people don't have their own office? There's an Office of Insular Affairs. There's an Office of Indian Affairs. We're not under Insular Affairs. We're not under Indian Affairs. Where are we? So he made an Office of Native Hawaiian Relations. And then it started and still has a staff of one person. And that one person is the one Hawaiian in the Department of Interior by the name of Kimo Kaloi, who has no staff under him, but he is a single Hawaiian in the Office of Native Hawaiian Relations, responsible for all of this connection to us as community. So my point about Kimo Kaloi is, whether you like Kimo Kaloi, think he's effective or ineffective, he is the sole Hawaiian trying to hold these guys accountable. Probably, in many people's opinions, not very effective because he's one guy with, again, the whole same budget story, right? It's not like they're giving Kimo Kaloi millions of dollars to come out here and reach out to Hawaii. Under her name has escaped me. The Assistant Secretary, not Lisa Oshiro, works here locally. She also works for the Department of Native Hawaiian, Office of Native Hawaiian Relations here in Honolulu at the Fed office in Honolulu. And then last year they hired a gentleman by the name of Stanton Inamoto. And Stanton is in Honolulu. He's also a representative of the DOI working in the Office of Native Hawaiian Relations. All wonderful, great people, nothing against them personally. We did not support the position of Stanton Inamoto being in Hawaii. And why is that? Because they just forget about us here. It's just like HUD, right? HUD has a representative here in Honolulu. And that HUD person's job is oversight of NAHASDA. And yet every year that HUD person was saying, they're doing awesome. They were signing off on the audits until we found out, well, we're not spending our money fast enough, so we got zeroed out in the budget. And that happened when we had a representative of a federal agency in Hawaii. And so I think it's just our position was it's too risky. When that federal agent is separated from the federal government and is sitting in Hawaii, it gets sucked up into the state administrators. They become friends. There's a lot of political pressure. It's only one guy. So now we have the DOI who's supposed to be helping us better connect to the DOI to implement that federal oversight. He's not in Washington, D.C. rubbing elbows with other oversight guys. He's in Honolulu, not in D.C. Pardon me? Stanton Inamoto is Hawaiian. And Lisa Oshiro is Hawaiian. They're both, yes, they're both Hawaiians. Yes. They are. Okay, and then section 207 clarifies that the Secretary of the DOI shall adjust or eliminate charges, defer collections, or construction costs for beneficiaries that hold leases on Hawaiian homelands to the same extent permitted for Indians.
Do you think one of our problems is that we don't have beneficiaries serving beneficiaries as defined? I think in every step that we go, I mean, like the legislators or even Kimo Kaloi and Stanton, I know they're Native Hawaiians, but are they as defined? I think that's the big problem. People that are not even aware and they have to cater to this federal, basically congressional approval. I think that's our whole, I what I'm seeing is they're not beneficiaries, so they cannot possibly comprehend or take our situation as serious as the general public, which they serve because they're not beneficiaries in the beginning.
I would agree with that assessment.
And even like our commissioners, like, how much of them are beneficiaries?
I would love for the 9 commissioners all to be
At least,
beneficiaries of the one, whether that's on the land or on the wait list.
Yeah.
An eligible beneficiary, would love to see that.
And that's why beneficiary approval of that kind of situation would be the most ideal and practical for our situation, because no matter where you go, like you said, chemo's a one-man guy, but chemo becomes not even familiar or doesn't even want to concern himself with this 50% situation, because chemo is only 25 or 49 or something. So like he already neglects that back half. So just like wherever we go, wherever we point, it's already neglection and breach of trust from a beneficiary's circumstances that I see. And that's just horrible to see it in every angle. So like to vote for who? Somebody that the non-beneficiary is going to appoint to do non-beneficiary violations to the
So we need to run then. We need to insert ourselves as beneficiaries to take those positions.
These places are already hand-picked. It's not, none of us is going to be governor. No beneficiary is going to be governor. Maybe it's lucky, right? The closest to a beneficiary.
Right, I was going to say, I beg to differ. You guys should be advocating for...
But then yeah, I can kind of see that, but in a short term, like I'm saying, like 10 years, I don't see that realistically happening. And that's why...
Okay, so
getting these things done.
I hear you. So, which is why we're doing this, right? When CNHA started 15 years ago, we tried to do advocacy then back then. I think that our communities are grown up a lot and are a lot more active. And yes, it's easy to be frustrated because we can see how it's so easily misconstrued, because we do need to be more actively engaged. So you're correct. That is the answer that we each need to ask ourselves. What do we do to do that?
So how do we start appointing our own commissioners? Because I think I started appointing our commissioners.
So right now, let me tell you, sad but true, I just received news that we lost Commissioner Bill Richardson, right? He passed. We should right now be advocating like hell that it's an Oahu seat. Is it an Oahu seat or at large? I gotta go back and look. But if it's an at large, then yes, there can be any recommendations, but I believe it's Bill Richardson filled an Oahu seat. But Oahu beneficiaries, I mean every beneficiary, you might know a good person in Oahu, that we should right now be sending letters to the governor to say, here's our recommendation, that there's an opportunity, Pua Chin stepped down in Kauai. No, Pua Chin. I mean, there's a lot. Maui stepped down too. Pua Gomes. And so, in all of those instances, we should be putting names forward.
How do we not put names but implement? I'm not, you know what I mean? To place in names is just...
Well, right now, in order to implement, you need to change that policy. We can't just put them in the seat. Right now, the policy is that the governor has that say. So, unless they just go sit at that seat at the commission meeting. You can try that approach. Most times we're just getting ourselves arrested, right? So we need to fix the policy. That doesn't mean you don't go get arrested. Sure, some are taking that approach, but we need to change the law. We need to change the way that they're appointing, because right now that is dependent on the governor. Until we get active enough to change the process, that's why people are doing what they're doing. Demonstrating. Pardon me?
Or influence the governor.
Or influence the governor by sending letters. By, again, people are just tired of telling, and then you don't get the action because you don't see. This governor promised us change and we didn't get much.
Because we should be able, like, how all these things you're describing, it paints a very beautiful picture. But then how do you implement it? Because you're saying, oh, we have this, we can do that, but I mean... Like,
it's not easy. It takes a long time.
I'm just thinking in a simple perspective, by doing the commissioner move and having that in place would be a way more beneficial thing than to be writing love letters. at this point. And that's like I said, I'll put over here.
Okay, so tell me how you think we could do that. How do we?
I'm asking you, how can we help?
I'm telling you what I know. We need to change the law unless we're willing to break it, right? That we can't just say, I'm going to implement it. I'm going to appoint Uncle to be the commission. Right now, I'd be lying to you if I tell you I've appointed him.
No.
Right now, the process says that the
The
government.
community at large will say, hey, you never say anything about this guy being the self-appointed, and we decided that we have a kapuna over here who's fit and knows enough to be our representative on this undivided interest. That's all I'm saying. It's like, how do we have just make ourselves get into the seat that we're supposed to be?
Let me give you an example.
Right.
When I had stepped down, East Hawaii Commission, I got together with Pat. He suggested Wally. I suggested another person, but at the end of the day, the community itself said,
Right.
Wally is homegrown, been in the, so, we chose Wally. We wrote letters to the governor. We wrote letters advocating on behalf of the association and as well as the residents on Evan and Kilpaw. A month later, his name was put in a letter by the governor before the legislation. That's one way. Another way is CNHA, Shaw. You could advocate a person of their choosing, providing you guys, more likely will know the person that will, that group will choose. It's up to each association. They're going to have to write on those fall.
I fully agree with that, how you guys approach it in that kind of manner. Yeah, absolutely. I'm ready to submit some letters now, if you can make that kind of impact, yeah?
I think we can, and I think even when you look at the last DLNR, I forget his name already, but Governor Ige put forward a name for DLNR. So many community members went there and testified. He never got appointed. He didn't get approved by the legislature, but that takes active engagement, being present. I think that a lot of what has happened to our communities is that we've been absent.
Yes.
And
because we've been not educated.
Yes.
To be present.
Sure.
And how to be present and how to voice ourselves.
Yeah, and absolutely, and there's a lot of people also who, there is a lot of pain that I know we all have, that the history and the illegal occupation of Hawaii and all that went on is painful, and so some people say, I refuse to engage in that process because it's wrong to begin with, that it is fake, that the state is not really real, and I understand all of that, but at the same time, here's where we are, that's a long-term game that I don't think is going to happen soon, and you're shaking your head saying no, so you can, it might be...
My long-term might be different
from your, yeah. No, true. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying my way is better than your way. I'm saying that everybody, it's this and that, and that. That if we ignore what's going on right now, then they're ignoring us, and that's exactly what has happened, right? Because some of us don't want to engage, and I get why. I don't think you can find a Hawaiian who doesn't believe that independence would be the best. But I can tell you that I think that there are things that we have to do right now before we achieve that. That's not going to come easily. And maybe some people think it will be easier than others, and I don't say don't go after that, I say go after that. But there are some things that we need to do today, because until that happens, what's going on now is a whole bunch of BS that we're not even at the table to help decide on, right? So, but I do see a lot of growth in our community where people are more actively engaged than ever before. Yep, they're educated, they're getting involved, and we might not always agree on process, or we might not always agree on the end goal, and that's okay for me, as long as everyone's engaged. That the diversity of opinions, the diversity of input, that really is ultimately going to get us to where we want to be. We're not going to look at what happens now. Some of us didn't vote for Trump, but he's still our president. We can say he's not, but he is. Right? So, okay. So the last two sections are on reporting and appropriation authorizations. Yes. Yes. 207 clarifies that the Secretary of the DOI shall adjust or eliminate charges, defer collection of construction costs to hold or for beneficiaries. So we don't pay for our construction, the infrastructure costs, right? When we're on Department of Hawaiian Home, we don't own the land, we only own our vertical structures, right? This is why they don't foreclose. So they're just saying that they can adjust or eliminate or defer the collection on any of the construction costs for beneficiaries that hold leases to the same extent permitted. In Indian country, on Indian reservations, same thing. Their trust lands, their reservations would be equivalent to our Hawaiian homelands, our trust lands. So when we're sold a home, we're not sold, DHHL is responsible for the infrastructure development. We're responsible for qualifying for the mortgage of the vertical structure. That's the clarification. Because we don't own the land. We're not putting money into the ground because when we move, we don't recoup that. That stays with the trust. Recoup only the vertical. So our appraisals only on vertical. The Native Americans and the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, if you take who patterned after who, we patterned after the 1906 Indian Allotment Act. If you look at the 1906 Indian Allotment Act and the 1920 Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, basically the federal law written for our trust lands was modeled after the 1906 Indian Allotment Act. And it wasn't very creative. They essentially did the same thing to us as they did when they created they dealt with us as a brown people the same way they dealt with the other brown people. Right?
It's really good. Put organic Title 3 of Hawaiian Commission Act. That way, here, this also will administrate the lands. Title 2. And that's supposed to be Rule 6 to keep them off. So that's why you all come
Is it there?
Title 2. It's supposed to be Title 3 organic.
Act.
That's the way the amendment 1921 came. They inserted Title 3, the organic act.
Into the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. Yes.
Separated by section 206.
Correct. His question was, how do we compare in terms of Native Hawaiians to Native Americans?
How do we run this?
Right. Correct. Nothing. We're both Native people. I'm just comparing Hawaiian Homes Commission Act to 1906 Indian Allotment Act.
They have all different from everything else.
Right. Indians are not Indians. There's no such thing as an Indian. That's an offensive thing. I'm not an Indian. Indians are Choctaw, they're Chippewa, they're Assiniboine, they're Cherokee. They're not Indians, they're Sioux, yeah. They're Mandan, Hidatsa. They are people of their place, tied to their land, just like us. So when we say we're not an Indian, there is no such thing as an Indian.
Except in India.
Screw America, called us all Indians. Right? So it's a hard thing, except in India, correct. Indians are the Indians, not with the feather, with the dot. Those are Indians from India. Okay? Okay, 5 minutes. I gotta drink water. And then we're gonna do our advocacy. What can we do about it?
We're gonna start getting papers.
Huh?
We'll get our papers ready.
You get your papers ready? Are you voting?
We would have to, right?
Yes.
You have to get my commissioner in, huh? How about the chair? What? No open bid for that?
Enya, was
I'm
just,
thinking of all the bids over here.
huh?
I'm thinking of all the availabilities, right?
Yeah.
How do we get the right governor in?
We vote.
Yeah, which one is the one that has the best relationship with this trust?
You know, that's what made the difference with Wally, because there was so many letters was going, and they recognized that this is voting people. There's people actually voting, so, you know, to go against, that's our thing, to go against that might put the governor in trouble.
But I do believe that you have to put the right implementations involved, right? And the process. It's good that you shared that too, because I didn't know that you guys implemented that part for the community, which is good because it has a result. And that's the main thing, it has a result to the efforts that you're going to put out, especially all those paperwork and time.
So I just want to say this. Quit recording me. No, you can record me, I'm teasing. People have heartburn when it comes to CNHA. I know that. That for years that CNHA has been in existence, as I started, where people say, oh, CNHA doesn't speak for us. We don't. Everybody has to speak for themselves. But we've been very active in doing the kinds of things like, well, what do you think we need to do about it? Those things don't take forever. An example is the interest income. We worked on that for 4 years. Going to every commission meeting practically every month for 4 years. Because they know we're not going to not show up. We're going to show up, and every time they have that transferring, we say, why are you doing that? How come? And finally, we're starting to see it. So some of it doesn't happen overnight, but I think that we've had the tenacity to stick with it. Sometimes people don't always agree with our position, but whatever your position is, you got to stick with it. You got to put your voice behind it. You got to gather your community and mobilize around the things that are important to you. Whether we all agree or not, we're going to end up with being the voice that rises, that they hear. So we have to keep doing it.
I cannot disagree with you, but I know that, you know, having our people, our beneficiaries exclusively know and who are 50% to be in these positions to make the sound
Matters,
choices.
sure.
And not just because it's going to be a job, it's something that they're going to be passionate about. And it's not just going to be
I will tell you from my own experience, when I was asked to join the Abercrombie administration at DHHL as the deputy, I never thought in a million years I'd ever go work at DHHL. Didn't really know why they were asking me to go to DHHL. Said maybe you would be a good person to go there. I went. I loved my job that I was doing, helping people on the wait list as it was. Went there because of what you're just describing now, that we need to put ourselves in those positions if we want to make change. Hardest job of my life. Sitting at meetings with shit I didn't agree with, saying, you're not talking about some Joe Schmo, you're talking about me, my son, my neighbor. That's where I live. I couldn't drive the DHHL car, are you kidding? I ain't driving no state vehicle in my homestead. To tell my neighbors they're paying for me to have a car that I drive around, are you kidding? I can walk from home. It was a hard thing to do, so you're right. It takes us being in there and being willing. You also take slaps in the head, right? You take, and so we have to support one another, that you're correct, it takes that. And then when we find people who have the courage to go and fill those positions and do it, we can't knock them down, we have to build them up. Because that's really what happens. You get people in there, it's hard. When you're a commissioner and
but it's easy
your
to
people
knock, it's easy to knock down these commissioners who are not even 50%ers.
Right, it's easy, but I mean, it's even easy when you're going to commission meetings and you had an IM Leroy, right? And there were times when your own community would be frustrated with him because he's not moving fast enough, but he's dealing with what he's dealing with too. So we have to understand that these processes do take some time. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. We have to be willing to take those positions. We have to be willing to run for office. When we talk about how the state is not acting in our interest, think about if we had Native Hawaiian senators, do you think we would be making a difference? Absolutely. But we have to be bold enough to take those risks. We have to be bold enough to put our names out there. We have to take those chances and get involved. We have to be engaged. Otherwise, we just get frustrated. And then we start getting frustrated with each other because we have different positions. And it's really not the fact that we have different positions. It's that none of our positions are being heard because we're not engaging with the government process.
I think there should be a standard test for even a commissioner to be a commissioner, like the 50% and
Right,
knowing
like
the
what does
charge,
HHCA
right?
stand
all that
for?
kind of stuff, like, kind of just.
No, I hear you, I agree.
Like, it's just
I
fucking
agree.
ridiculous, right?
Yeah. Okay, so public policy advocacy, what do we do with that? How are we dealing with it? I'm not gonna run you through this again, you know, our other partner on this piece is the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs. Again, we work with those groups, CNHA with the Shaw and the civic clubs, because like us, as a network of Native Hawaiian nonprofits, they're a network of civic clubs and a network of homestead associations. You don't need to know that. We walked through that already. So, CNHA's coalition overview. Just a quick overview of the founding of CNHA. Before I even got there, CNHA was really founded by other Native Hawaiian organizations. At the time, Robin Danner, who had just come home from Alaska, she, Melody McKenzie, Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, Papa Ola Lokahi, Hardy Spoor was there, Ray Sook at the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. They got together to say, our people, what was articulated here earlier, that we didn't know how to advocate, we didn't know what we were supposed to do. So they really got together to say, here's what we need to do. The bottom line is CNHA was founded to serve Native Hawaiian organizations in various sectors in our community, to do federal policy, to help with capacity building and grant writing, and to host an annual convening where we would at least sit down and talk to each other. And so we still do these things today. On the federal policy level, as I said, our partner on public policy advocacy, we know that the Civic Clubs does a good job here at home. They're at the state legislature all the time. They were started by Prince Kuhio himself in 1918. And when you think about it, they're celebrating 100 years. Have you ever been to a Civic Club convention? They pass resolutions. They've been going through this process. Now, some of the resolutions are very meaningful and some not so meaningful. But the point is that they've been following a process, a democratic process for 100 years, founded by Prince Kuhio. Pretty amazing. I love it. Right? So, intermediary role of CNHA, there's 4 real areas. When I say an intermediary, I said, Hawaii has the most nonprofits per capita in the nation. So we play a role of an intermediary as we're a network of 100-something other Native Hawaiian nonprofits. And why are there so many Native Hawaiian nonprofits? We create a nonprofit to fill a need of some sort, right? Whether that's health, housing, education, small business, and we create a nonprofit. Some are real, some meet regularly, some just started because we want to send the football team to Disneyland, and in order to get contributions, we're going to create a nonprofit that people can give to so we can send the team there. But for whatever reason, we have the most nonprofits per capita in the country. So we really wanted to unify those nonprofits and figure out how do we give service to the smaller guys. So we do an intermediary role to help bring resources and capacity so that we can share our knowledge and our resources to organizations who don't have as many. So as a national intermediary, this is what it looks like. Cultural organizations, civic, homestead, housing, what have you. They are members of CNHA, and then we operate in those 4 areas as I talked about earlier this morning. So those members collectively elect our board of directors every 3 years. We have a board election. Our members elect the 21 members of our board. And they serve to deliver those 4 services, and those 4 services get returned to our member organizations. So, housing need. Just giving you an example. We keep talking about housing, about people on the wait list, how we can't afford the Hawaiian homestead turnkey lot. So what are we doing about that? What CNHA is doing right now in partnership with the SHA, the Homestead Housing Authority, we understand that need, we push it to our board. Our board says, well, out of the things that we do, what can we do to help as an intermediary? One of those things is we're partnering with them to develop a tiny home model that costs $85,000 because we think $85,000 is more doable for a beneficiary to afford than $385,000. It's not the solution for everybody, but it's the solution that we can bring to the table, and other people will bring other solutions to the table. The other thing we're doing is we're raising capital. We just got our first investment from the Kresge Foundation of $500,000 and $500,000 from the Treasury. And now I take that $1 million and run around to figure out what other kind of organizations want to help leverage so I can build a pool of money that I can lend Hawaiians who don't qualify anywhere else so that they can do this tiny home project. And then third, I just signed an MOU with an entity who serves Indian country on the continent that they package 502 loans, which is for low-income families, so that they can access direct capital from the federal government. So we have certified staff who will package these loans, and that's our contribution to how do we help people get into housing. As a result, we take those things that we've created so that we can return to the need that was told to us we need a more affordable housing unit for Hawaiians. It's so awesome. This is what it looks like. It's a manufactured home. It's not a container, but it's a manufactured home. It's container-like in that they're 8 feet by 20 feet. So we're doing a 3-pack home, which is 480 square feet. Unskilled labor can put this together, and I mean unskilled, like my husband, Robin's husband, our kids, an intern that was on Kauai, and one construction manager, which was Mike Hudson, who flew over from Hawaii Island. And that's what it looks like today. 480 square feet, it's a 1-bedroom. It's a very simple 480 square foot home. My job now is to raise $15 million in capital. I got the first $1 million. I got to raise 14 more million.
What is the magic number per house?
Total package, labor, materials, flooring, appliances, $85,000.
That's 2-bedroom?
1 bedroom. 15-year mortgage. When I finance it, it's $659 a month.
How much a month?
$659. It's permitted by the Department of Planning. We did Oahu. We got DPP permits. We worked with the Oahu County, and then right now it's going through Kauai. So really, the focus for us right now is to be outside of Oahu because we get criticized a lot that Oahu thinks they're the center of the universe. So we're going to start on the neighbor islands. We want to be here, and we did this on Kauai because the homesteaders of Kauai had a communal parcel where we could pilot the project, and we needed to go through it. One of the things we learned, for example, is that roof. It's better if you just buy wood trusses here, because getting people up on the roof trying to screw into that metal stuff was hard work. And they said, we wouldn't want that the next time. We would want wood so we could just use our guns and tack it down. But it was actually really scary in that I wasn't sure we were going to like the quality of it, but it's pretty awesome.
Is that the houses out in Kauai?
Yeah.
How much houses you guys put up of that?
That was just one. This is our pilot. So now we're...
and you said it took about a week?
It took 32 work days to complete it. Although you see how it's on those footings, that was outside of the 32 days. So before the package arrived, we had to get the permitting for the foundation. So that took a while. Permitting takes a while, and then we had to pour the footings and all that. So when it arrived, when the package arrived, the footing was already down. And then we had to rent a crane for 1 day. There was a crane operator, so the floor and the lid are very heavy. But the rest that guys can put up. So once you put it up, it's all up. And then once it's covered, then the rest is all the interior work. But it took them 32 full work days to get the thing totally completed. It's pretty awesome. Anyway, that's an example of our role as a nonprofit intermediary. So to find resources, whether that's policy, funding, or sharing of best practice at home. Some resources we can only get as an intermediary, and that's where CNHA feels its role is, to serve other Native Hawaiian organizations. It took me 5 years to get the Kresge Foundation to commit to giving money to us in Hawaii. And why did the Kresge Foundation actually do it? Based on balance sheet, based on financials, based on our years of existence, and then also understanding partnerships and our willingness to kick that out to other members in the community. So that's really where we are today. And those were just to show you that role of an intermediary. So policy advocacy matters. Whether others ignore it or deny it, we have embraced that we are U.S. citizens. Not everybody embraces that, and it's okay if you don't. But CNHA cannot deny that. It matters. to the stewardship organizations, to the charter schools, to housing orgs, and to many of the organizations that are homestead associations here in this room today, simply because it is a federal law. The Native Hawaiian Education Act is a federal law. Native Hawaiian Healthcare Improvement Act is a federal law. So I won't deny that I'm a U.S. citizen because those resources are coming because of that status. Do you know, so how do we know what to work on? Again, answering to that question, we don't speak for everybody, we don't. But we do this and we do it often. We gather with there are 8 major caucuses, and I'm being pushed right now to say, you need to have a Malama Aina caucus. And the Malama Aina folks are saying, no, it's not a caucus. It should be integrated into every darn caucus that you have. So that conversation is going on right now. But there's a housing caucus that is led by Hawaiian Community Assets. There's an education caucus, and really the leaders there have been KS, Punana Leo, and the Native Hawaiian Education Council. The Shaw has been leading our Trust Land Caucus, NAMEA, and the Hawaiian Studies Group at UH doing the Next Gen Leaders Caucus. I will tell you that for the Next Gen leaders, Punihe and Kaumaka Aki, who came from Hawaii Nui Akea, they've been 4 years ago said, next generation leaders want to know, how is CNHA integrating our mana'o? We want to create an advisory committee to tell you what we care about. And our board said, we'll give you 2 seats on our board. So they have 2 representatives from Hawaii Nui Akea that sit on the CNHA board today. But my point here is that, yes, we have a set of policy priorities that we advocate and we follow. That's how I direct the attention of my staff throughout the year, but I get those policy priorities from community leaders and members of our organization who convene sectors of their community to determine those. So policy advocacy is about writing laws, passing bills, making them law, and it's also non-governmental, helping funders find you, helping resources get to your community for the things that you need. Not all policy advocacy is about law. It's also about how funding comes down. Are we doing the right advocacy to ensure that Native Hawaiian health care is going to get reauthorized? That law is going to expire in 2019, and if we want to continue to have Native Hawaiian health care money, we need to advocate to make sure that that appropriation stays in the bill, stays in the budget rather, and that that bill is reauthorized. This is just a sample of some of the advocacy that we do, because when we go to Washington, D.C., we can't do it alone. They don't care. We're CNHA with 100 members of Native Hawaiian nonprofits. Okay, that sounds great, but really we have to hold hands with all kinds of organizations. We partner with the National Congress of American Indians. We partner with National Capacity. So that's just a sampling of when we go to D.C. and why we go to D.C. To raise our voice, we have to connect hands with other people doing advocacy work so that they're also helping to advance the things that are important to us. And this is what I think we're missing at home. That we might have differences of opinions, we might have different strategies, but until we start holding hands and advocating for what is best for Hawaiians in general, that is very, very difficult. So most of CNHA's work has been at the federal level, where we've been able to partner and link up with other folks to advocate for policies important to us. So some of the strategies by Native coalitions, they use a diversity of Native voices. We work together by coordinating Hill visits with other organizations and groups. Same thing that we can do here. We can coordinate with one another at homestead associations, whether that's to pursue a recommendation for a commissioner or to support a bill or to kill a bill. But we have to start to work together to do that. What's been happening, the advocacy that's been happening, I think last year it happened, DHHL did it, right? They said, everybody wear this blue shirt, we're gonna go to the... I don't want us to be doing that as the state. That is not the same thing, right? That's us advocating for the state. What I'm saying to you is we need to learn to advocate for each other, right? So that's the kind of stuff we do at the federal level. That's what I'd like to see us do at the state level. Do not let congressionals take us for granted. Right now, when I was at DHHL, I let go of the 2 lobbyists they had. Because in my opinion, if I was going to go to Washington, D.C. in my deputy capacity to represent DHHL, the only person that I wanted to go with was another beneficiary. Your story to me is more powerful than any lobbyist can do for me in D.C. I couldn't see paying $200,000 for a lobbyist. You know how many tickets we could buy for Hawaiians to go to D.C.? Right? That there is no lobbyist that can replace the voice of our community. But until we step up and put ourselves into that role, that's who's speaking for us. Our agencies contract lobbyists to speak on our behalf. So when you say to me, CNHA doesn't speak for me, I don't, but guess what? There's a woman by the name of Pat Zell who gets paid by DHHL, and she is, whether you like it or not. Sorry. Identify priorities, move them when we can. We don't have to be problem solvers. We know that the road is long, we're tenacious, we're not going to complain about it. I don't like what's happening today, but I'm not the victim. I'm going to do a little bit every year. You're very welcome. I'm going to call you back because I want you to get people to vote. I want the people that you know to get out and vote.
I'm going to call them.
And then partisanship chaos, right? At home, we don't have this. Because the whole state, everybody's a Democrat at the legislature. Right? We don't really have this partisan chaos. Everyone in Hawaii is the bluest state ever. Right? We have all Democratic party leaders. And in there, we have our own problems, right? We have our own set of problems because of that. And some things grow in chaos, and that's okay. So some of the strategies, again, by Native Coalition, we use a diversity of Native people and foundations. We work together to educate people so that they can make better decisions for themselves. I don't need to make decisions for you. You need to make decisions for yourself. My role is to provide proper education. We're not bitter about the lack of support that we have. We tried to build that support. Advocacy is about building that support. Not being angry about the support we don't have, but taking action to build the support that we want for various issues. And then finally, our strategies with Native communities, as I said again, we embrace the fact that the I am not an Indian thing is just, nobody's an Indian. We're all Native people, and we definitely at CNHA partner with Native people to advance policies for all of us. Yes?
Isn't the definition of Indian indigenous to America?
I don't know. I will look that up for you, for myself.
Well, that's what I say.
Indigenous.
That's what I know. That's my understanding of the term when I say I'm not an Indian. So.
Because you're saying that the definition is that you're not.
Definition.
So a Native Hawaiian would not be a person in your definition about Native to Hawaii.
Yeah. I mean, we're not indigenous to America. We're indigenous
to Hawaii.
To the
Right.
Hawaiian Islands.
So there are 3 indigenous people in the, well, if the U.S. exists for you or not for me, I'm just going to tell you in the U.S. Native Hawaiians, indigenous to Hawaii. Native Americans, indigenous to America. And Alaska Natives, indigenous to Alaska, not the continental U.S. So I don't believe it's indigenous to America, it's indigenous to your place. That place which America came to, you were there before America took it over, whether legally or illegally. You were already there. That's what makes us indigenous. Our stuff was there before you. We will be there after them. We were already here, and that's what makes us unique as natives. Native Americans were already on the continental U.S. before they were occupied. And so I don't think it's about America. Indian is a term used in the United States Constitution to deal with the people who were there before they arrived.
Right, but the definition is indigenous to America. So that's why when we say as the Aboriginal people of Hawaii, the indigenous people of the Hawaiian Islands, when we say we're not Indians, that's why we're saying that. It's not because we don't understand the definition.
I got you. So I guess my question then for you, are you okay with because I just don't want to take this conversation all the way to where I know it's going to get. I know you're not an Indian to that degree, what you're saying, and I know I'm not trying to make you a tribe, but I am cognizant of the fact that in the U.S. Constitution, it deals with its native people by referring to them as Indian. So are we an Indian to that extent? I'm saying because I'm acknowledging my U.S. citizenship, the Constitution is referring to me there as an Indian, and yes, that is, I'm going to get those rights and benefits that they issue out to Indians under that law to bring that home to my people. So I think if we could come to some understanding about that, you are the first person who has ever articulated without being angry at me about why you're not an Indian, so thank you. I appreciate that tremendously, and I will follow up on that. I hear you, but that's the first time I've heard, because that's the first time it's been explained that way. Yeah. So thank you. So some of this is, the next slides are just about our priorities. So we started off having policy priorities just in, I used to say it can only be one page because I can't chase down more than one page worth of stuff. The front has to deal with CNHA and OHA, and the back has to deal with every other priority. But that has changed over the years because our caucuses say they don't fit on one page anymore, and this is what we want you to help us on. So just so that you know, and we're being fully transparent about it, I gave you a sample of some of the policy priorities that we have been working on over the years, and those that are crossed out are some of those that we took off. So why are we doing this, and why do we think this is important? Because we firmly believe that whatever we do together is very much more effective than what we do alone. And that sometimes policy advocacy requires the poking of a coalition to get action, right? As you described earlier, right? Coming together as the Homestead Association, rather than just being Bill Brown writing the letter for Wally. He was able to say, here, we all got together, and this is what we agreed on, and this is what we want your support. But sometimes coalition work is much more effective. And so we're really working together. Why? Because we're trying to learn how to identify and solve decades-old issues that have been there over and over. And now we want to know how do we deal with this. So those that are achieved in yellow with the lines crossed out, those are the things that we have taken off our list. Many have been removed, but there are still many, many more to work on. Each year at our annual convention, we take some things off and we add some things on. But this kind of keeps my staff focused on the things that we're going to take stock of here. So we review a few that is still on the list. This is a big one that came from Maui, Section 8 housing vouchers for home ownership. So you can use your Section 8 vouchers for home ownership. It's just not too many of them, so they need to expand that. Education. I'm sure many of you saw the chaos around CNHA got the charter school funding money, and nobody wanted us to have it. Well, the reason why I went after that contract was this. My education caucus for 7 years has been saying, we need more money. So I went to the Gates Foundation and to the Kellogg Foundation and to KS and to say, all right, we need to show them that locally we're investing in our charters, and with our local investment, we should track national investment. So I chased down the OHA contract, we won it, and then people said, no, don't give it to them, they're taking money away from our children. No, not really. 1.3 million would have still went to the charter schools, just like it always did. 70,000 would have still directly funded their education conference and moving students around the state. And then 130,000 of it would have gone directly to CNHA to run those programs and to leverage dollar for dollar $1.3 million. So misunderstanding led to now the state's going to keep that themselves. Well, guess what? Gates Foundation, Kellogg's Foundation, they're not going to give money to our state. They can't leverage that money. They're a state agency. So the charters will continue to get their 1.3, each getting their allocation. But again, misunderstanding. We didn't get it, we're not going to cry about it, we're going to move on. But why did we go after it? because they asked us, charter school funding for the charter schools. Why didn't we reach out to the charter schools to say, hey, because we had 9 days to submit a letter of interest, which we did, and then 7 days after we responded to the letter of interest, actually 14 days to turn in a submittal. Our submittal didn't say, a charter school has to deliver this. Our agreement was just to write checks to the charters as they would have got from any other fiscal sponsor, any other administrator. No use crying over spilled milk. It's going to be done by OHA. We have to try again 2 years from now. You had a question?
As a former school administrator, I can see that the fiasco that you're talking about,
Yes.
it could have been avoided because even though you were under the time constraint, they had no idea what was going on. So they cannot be blamed for what they did not know.
Sure.
They made assumptions.
Well, so here's,
both based on a limited amount of.
I will tell you that I don't think that I met with all the charter schools before the final decision of the OHA schools. Had a great meeting with the charter school leaders. Not all of them were supportive, not all of them understood, but I thought that we got to a place where we understood why we went after it. And most importantly to me was talking to Kanu, who was administering it before, which I spent hours meeting and talking to Kathy. So beyond all of that, I think that there was advocacy from parents who had students at the charter school, who had probably a good voice in that too, and they're rightfully so. But I think there was a lot of misunderstanding. Our intent was not to take money, and the way that was framed was we're taking money away from the students. Absolutely not. The students would have gotten exactly the same amount of money that they got under any other contract.
But those parents didn't see that. What I'm trying to explain to you is the process was one that was set up for failure because there's going to be revolution if there's not an understanding. And maybe you have an understanding with the leaders, but if you don't have an understanding with the community, because most of the time the community is against the leaders anyway.
It went on for months of testimony, right? So yes, I am guilty as charged. Did I reach out to every charter school in those 14 days? No. I didn't know.
Please don't think of yourself as guilty. It's something you could not foresee, but
Yeah.
but you can foresee that in the future.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I'm going to move on. It is what it is. Many of those charter schools are actually dues-paying members at the council. So I was very confused. But I do think that advocacy comes from parents as well, and it is what it is. My point was, why did we go after that? It was a priority. It was an education priority brought to us by years of work. The last time we did that work, we invited Secretary Duncan, the head of the Department of Education, to a Native Hawaiian charter school so he could see for himself. And then we started on that road in those years, and that's where we ended up. It is what it is. We got to try again in 2 years. Reauthorizing the Federal Native Hawaiian Healthcare Act. That act is going to expire in 2019. It's going to need to be reauthorized. It's going to require our advocacy. In years before, when the act was not reauthorized, we had Senator Inouye, the king of the Appropriations Committee. So whether the act was authorized or not authorized, he'd stick money in there in the appropriations to make sure that his state was taken care of. We don't have that luxury anymore. Number 5, FCC protection of USF funds. Another very controversial subject about SIC on Hawaiian homelands. SIC's money that they get is specific to trust lands. Is specific to finding resources that will put infrastructure in trust land areas. So whether Alhi made terrible mistakes about what he claimed on his taxes, that's one thing. That's a separate issue of those resources that went in the ground, the infrastructure that is in the homesteads. Those federal resources are specific to trust lands, and those are our assets as beneficiaries, and we should protect those. That those funds are specific to putting infrastructure into our trust lands. Some others, arts and culture, we're supporting the Kalaupapa Ohana right now. There are a handful of patients, I want to say there are 8 of them left. The youngest one is 75 years old. They are taking their conceptual design into architectural design. They want a memorial before the last patient shuts his or her eyes that memorializes the people who were sent to that place. And so we're fundraising for the Kalauhapa Ohana. We're working on sending more interns and fellows to DC to get that experience. We are doing small business training across the country. There's a big push. Blue Continent, we call it Blue Continent because there's a lot of Pacific Islanders. Some from Palau, Micronesia, from Hawaii. Pacific Islanders working together saying climate change is real. Even if our president doesn't believe in it, we have islands that are going underwater in the Pacific, and it's very real. And then, of course, we have been strong supporters of self-governance and passage of government-to-government relationship. Okay, I'm not going to go through every single one. You have this list, but that's some of our policy priorities. Some of the priorities are local, some of them are national. Whether they're federal or local, strategy matters. Being a coalition matters, us connecting hands and working together. Our national coalition matters, and being an intermediary to bring resources to the very small organizations that can't capture those on themselves, by themselves, is important to us as the council. So best practices, some of our best practices in advocacy is that we are we're Native first. We're not Republican or Democrat. We will support the candidate that will support Native issues. I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, whatever. Our policy is to be policy, not politics. They're not the same. In Hawaii, I find, my grandfather's brother was the Speaker of the House, Michelle Kauhane, when Hawaii was a territory and then became a state many, many years ago. So I grew up in an environment where people, except for one uncle who was in the union, we don't want to deal with politics. We don't do politics. And what I've learned once I got to my 30s is that there's a big difference. Really learned this from Robin. Difference between policy and politics. We're not negotiating politics behind closed doors. We do this. We think that policy matters. If offered the opportunity to sit with the president, are we going to take it? Damn straight, but it takes years of advocacy to get there. But we definitely are policy wonks, and we will push policy. Don't believe in politics, don't need it. There's no amount of manapua or butt kissing that's going to get us what we want for the long run. It's all about sound policy to get good decision makers in good seats to advance our people. Lobbyists versus community leaders, again, they're not the same. We don't want lobbyists speaking for us. The best thing that we can do when there is a lobbyist is have them do research. Have them write our talking points. Have them tell us what is happening that we need to know in the political landscape, and then let us loose to speak for ourselves. There is nothing that a lobbyist can do for us that we can't do for ourselves. Community advocates, how we will get our land back is how we work together. How we hold officials accountable for the things that are happening at the county level, at the state level, at the federal level. Okay, so here's one view of policy advocacy. This is what happens. Lots of lobbyists by government agencies meeting with policymakers. They're speaking on our behalf. I don't like that model. I like this model. I want us, Hawaiian organizations and individuals, working with government funders, congressional members, government agencies, working together, Hawaiian community leaders doing this advocacy for ourselves. Even if our advocacy are for different positions, it's okay. That is completely okay, but we all need to engage and do this for ourselves. So our best practices in policy, we all have a role. State government has a role, our Ali'i Trust have a role, our Hawaiian, we all have roles in different areas in the community, and we need to continue to do those together. To serve our people, to tell our story, to build coalitions around policy, around capacity building, and being able to tee up funding to support the kind of work that you're doing in your communities. What do we do with President Trump? We get asked this question all the time. How are you doing policy advocacy? I go, first of all, he is the president. Even though he might not be my president, he is the president. Second, he won't always be the president, right? Just like our governor won't always be the governor. And so we're talking about midterm elections, 2020 elections, not because who are you going to vote for, what are you going to do, knowing that these things are coming up and all we're saying is engage. Vote and vote for other people. If you don't like the people in office now, you got to vote for others. What we will do or not do, we won't wring our hands, we'll back burner the things that we can't take care of in this administration, and we'll put forward the things that we think we can. We'll make decisions based on what's good for our members, not what's good, not based on being Democrat or Republican. What are the things that we can do with the Trump administration that's good for our members? Those are the things we have to focus on. People always say, federal recognition is dead, Trump ain't gonna. I don't ask Trump for federal recognition. No need. Has nothing to do with him. The ball's in our court. We have to decide that. We don't need that anything from the Trump administration. Democracy rocks. That we're going to exercise our democracy. And we're going to vote to rise, which is the last piece that I want to talk to you about. And if you just look, I'm not going to put any PowerPoint on the slides. I just want you to look at this. This is a request for proposal. If you want to engage in this, and you don't have to, it's a program administered by the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, and an example of us playing our intermediary role. We won a National Foundation Award to do community engagement. And so now what we're saying is we need partners on the ground to engage Hawaiians so that we are making the difference in the kinds of issues that we're talking about today. So if you have an organization, a 501c3 or a sports group or whatever, that would like to engage in getting your community or your coalition engaged, then we're asking you to take a look at this request. It's a simple application form where you can check things off, because I know that a lot of you are doing this work already. Like when you're in your homestead, I don't know how you invite people to the homestead meetings. For us, we have somebody that goes door to door with flyers, right? So if you're already going door to door, you're canvassing as it is. Canvassing to see, are there registered voters in that house, and can we remind them to register? If they're already registered, can we tell them to do absentee ballots? And we're paying people to do this work. We're giving sub-grants out of our grant to get other communities engaged. Again, I don't care where you stand, what your position is on issues. If you're a nonprofit and you're delivering direct service to your community already, and you say, yes, I'll incorporate this into what I'm doing, we'll pay you $3,500. And then if you want to add, okay, we do an outreach event because we have a ho'olaule'a, we'll have a vote to rise booth, blah, blah, blah. You just check the things you think you're capable of doing, and for each thing that you're willing to engage in, we'll pay you to do that work. So it's an opportunity. You're not required. We're sharing it with you because we have, last year, Hilo High School did this. Kea'au High School did this. We were on campus on National Voter Registration Day, and students did it to raise money for their events. I think Kea'au wanted uniforms for their basketball team, so they engaged, and the basketball team did it on campus. Or maybe that was Kapolei High School. Anyway, a couple high schools that did this. And nonprofits, so Papakolea Homestead, they're doing canvassing because they're doing a health survey. So as they're going door to door, they're including this. So if anybody is interested and wants to do this to raise money for whatever your cause is, we're happy to. We still have funds to sub-grant to people who want to get their communities engaged. Once our elected officials understand that we're voting and our voices matter, then they will take us seriously. Vote to Rise is about mobilizing the Native Hawaiian vote. I don't care who you vote for, I don't care what party you're in. All I know is that in order for them to take us seriously, we need to show them that we are engaged, that we care about what's going on, and we're going to do something about it. So, that's that. Do you have anything else, Manuela?
I have vote to rise material in my office. If you want to come to the office there. In the green folder, there's the OHA survey for this program on Lahui. Please fill it out. I'll make it feedback and how we can make this program better. So if you have any ideas that you want to make to your side.
Yep, so again, the CNHA was here today because we were invited by OHA as part of their Manai Lahui series. But we do these regional trainings across the state. I'm going to come back and do this with the Kohala seniors. I would love to come back and partner with the Kohala seniors, Hawaiian or non-Hawaiian, anybody who's willing to support our causes, I'm willing to speak to. If we could ask you to do this cream-colored sheet, this evaluation, to help us be better at the information we share with you, how we could improve what we share with you. Is it too long? Is it too short? Should we not do this anymore? Should we do more? That would be helpful. And then also the OHA survey. And then put your voting is my kuli on a sticker wherever you can so we can get everybody to vote. Right? So if you want to, if you guys are interested in engaging your communities in the voter work, let me know. And we'll come back and do training specifically to registration. Woo!
I don't have an evaluation of this.
And then, unless you have any other questions, that's all I have. And it's 1:30, so I'm going to watch the end of the football game.